So hey, what's up guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. So in this video we are going to see what if Harry has Greek god blessing. So this will be movie, and don't worry, I will be not hosting the whole video, so you don't have to worry about my commentary. So let's get in the video.
The rebuilt stones of Hogwarts still didn't sound like Hogwarts. Harry noticed it most when the wind moved through the courtyards. Before the war, the castle D always had a kind of stubborn music to it, stairs that creaked with personality, portraits that whispered like gossip in the walls, torches that snapped and sighed as if the flames had opinions. Now, the air was quieter. Not empty. Just careful. Like the castle had learned to hold its breath. They'd rebuilt what could be rebuilt. They'd patched what could be patched. But grief didn't mortar cleanly into stone. Harry stood at the edge of the memorial garden where fresh grass and newly planted white flowers surrounded a simple ring of engraved names. The sun was low, turning the black letters gold. The names weren't arranged by house or rank or age. They were just names. Together. Equal. He told himself he came because he owed them that. He didn't tell himself the real reason, he did. Inti where else to go when the world felt too loud. A small group lingered near the edge, teachers, a handful of ministry officials, and a few students old enough to remember the battle. Hermione and Ron stood a little apart, giving him space without making him feel alone. Hermione's hair was pulled back the way she did when she'd decided to be strong on purpose. Ron's hands were stuffed in his pockets, shoulders tense like he was prepared to swear at the air if it so much as looked at Harry wrong. McGonagall spoke softly to the group. No grand speech. No attempts to make loss sound noble. Just the truth. We remember. We rebuild. We keep going because they can't. Harry listened, but the words moved past him like mist. His eyes kept catching on the names. Colin, Fred, Remus, Tonks, Ames. He could still hear in voices he didn't get to hear anymore. A bird called somewhere near the edge of the grounds. A normal sound. The kind of normal that always felt slightly insulting after everything. He breathed in. The air smelled like spring and stone dust. All right, Hermione asked quietly, stepping closer without making it a question he had to answer properly. Harry nodded. The no. D felt like a lie and a promise at the same time. Ron shifted, clearing his throat. Kingsley wanted to see you after. Harry blinked. Here. Ron jerked his head toward the path that led down from the castle. He came with a couple people. Official-looking lot. They're trying not to look like they're doing anything official. Harry's mouth tightened on instinct. He didn't hate Kingsley. If anything, Kingsley was one of the few people in the ministry who didn't make Harry feel like a symbol in human skin. But the ministry had a way of turning everything into paperwork and pressure. Hermie. One saw the expression and touched his sleeve. Just listen first. Harry did. He always did, these days. It felt like the only thing he was good at when he wasn't fighting. The small gathering began to break apart. Some left flowers. Some touched the engraved stone with two fingers like a prayer. Harry waited until the last of the students had gone, until the quiet had returned to being his quiet. Then Kingsley approached along the path, tall and steady, his robes immaculate even in the soft grass. Two ministry workers walked behind him carrying a narrow case between them, black wood with brass edges. The kind of case that suggested fragile importance. Kingsley's eyes softened when he saw Harry. Potter. Harry's shoulders rose and fell. Minister. Kingsley gave him a look that said don't start. Then his gaze flicked to Hermione and Ron, and he nodded to them. Miss Granger. Mr. Weasley. Minister, Hermione replied automatically. Ron gave a short grunt that could have been either greeting or warning. Kingsley chose to treat it like greeting. I'll get to the point, Kingsley said, because that was what he did when he wanted to show respect. There are complications emerging from the cleanup work. We're still recovering objects stolen during the war. Some of them weren't stolen by Death Eaters, but by opportunists. Collectors. People who thought the world ending was a good time to expand their shelves. Hermione's eyes sharpened. Artifacts. Kingsley nodded. Some. Most are mundane. A few are not. He stepped aside, and one of the workers set the black case car. Fully on a low stone bench near the memorial. Harry's stomach tightened. He didn't like cases. He didn't like objects that arrived with explanations. He didn't like anything that felt like fate wearing gloves. Kingsley opened the brass latches, one by one. This was retrieved last week from a private vault in London. The owner claims it's a historical curiosity. Unspeakables disagree. Hermione's chin lifted. Why bring it here? Kingsley's expression became complicated in that quiet, honest way of his. Because it reacted to your name. The words landed like cold water. Ron swore under his breath. Hermione stared at the case, then at Kingsley. Reacted how? Kingsley didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the lid. Inside, resting on velvet the color of old wine, was a small object, no bigger than Harry's palm. Not a wand, not a jewel, not a weapon in any obvious way. It looked like a leaf. A thin piece of metal shaped like a leaf, but not any leaf Harry recognized. Its edges were too perfect. Its surface too smooth. It wasn't silver or gold exactly, more like something that couldn't decide which it wanted to be. When the sun hit it, the light bent oddly, as if metal was remembering a brighter world. And it felt warm. Harry didn't move. He didn't want to. The air around the case seemed to tighten slightly, like the world had leaned in to watch. Hermione whispered, "That's not goblin-made." Kingsley's mouth twitched. "No. What is it?" Ron asked, his voice rough. Kingsley's eyes flicked toward the castle, then back. "We traced its origin through the vault records. It passed through several hands, most of them Muggle. The earliest documented acquisition links it to a Greek excavation site in the 19th century. The notes describe it as a fragment of a larger piece, something called." Harry's scar burned. Not like it had with Voldemort. Not like a wound remembering its blade. This was heat. A sudden flare that made the skin on his forehead feel too small. Harry lifted a hand to his scar without thinking. His fingers came away unmarked. Hermione's eyes widened. "Harry, it's fine," he lied, because saying anything else would make it real. Kingsley's voice grew quieter. "The golden apple." Ron blinked. "The what?" Hermione's breath caught, and for the first time in a long time, Harry saw something like fear flicker behind her intelligence. Not fear for herself. Fear for the shape of the world. Hermione said, slowly, "That's mythology." Kingsley nodded once. "So we hoped." Harry stared at the leaf-shaped fragment. It didn't look like an apple. But then again, he'd spent 7 years learning that names didn't have to make sense to be powerful. Kingsley went on, careful. "The unspeakables believe it's connected to an old story. A catalyst object. A divine provocation, if you like dramatic language." Ron's face hardened. "What does that have to do with Harry?" Kingsley's gaze held Harry's for a moment. "When we spoke your name in the artifact room, the temperature rose. The ward lines warped. The fragment moved." Harry forced his hand away from his scar. "So you brought it to me." "I brought it to Hogwarts," Kingsley corrected gently. "I brought it to the place where old magic has a habit of revealing itself." Hermione leaned in without touching the fragment. "Has anyone handled it?" "One unspeakable tried," Kingsley said. He blacked out. "Another tried to bind it. Every containment charm turned inside out. They stopped after that." Ron's gaze snapped back to Harry. "So the brilliant plan is, let Harry touch it." Harry almost laughed. "The sound would have been ugly. I didn't say I would." But his body had already betrayed him. The warmth in the air wasn't just coming from the case. It was coming from him, too. Like two magnets recognizing each other. Hermione's voice softened, urgent. "Harry, you don't have to." He looked at her, and he saw the unspoken truth. "If it's going to come for you anyway. Better to know what it is." Harry hated how often that had been his life. He took a step toward the case. The fragment shimmered. Not with light, with attention. Like it had been asleep and now it was awake. Kingsley's posture stiffened. The two workers behind him tensed, hands hovering near their wands. Harry reached out slowly. His fingers hovered above the leaf. He expected pain. He expected screams. He expected Voldemort's cold laugh in his skull. Instead, the moment his skin touched the metal, the world tilted. Not physically. Not like falling. Like the rules that held everything in place suddenly loosened by half an inch. A sound echoed inside Harry's mind, laughter, distant and vast, like thunder rolling across a mountain range. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was amused, curious, hungry. Then came a whisper. Not in English. Not in Parseltongue. Something older than language, meaning pressed directly into thought. A hero, after a war. Harry's breath hitched. A boy with a scar. The fragment pulsed gently under his fingers, warm as living flesh. What will you do with peace, little Victor? He tried to pull his hand away, but his fingers didn't want to. Not because he couldn't, because it felt like letting go of something that had been missing. The warmth spread up his hand, along his wrist, into his veins. And suddenly, he could see magic. Not as light or color. Not as some pretty visual effect. As structure. He looked up at the memorial stone and felt the enchantments woven into its surface, the permanence charm, the anti-weathering spell. The mild repelling ward to keep vandals away. They weren't invisible to him anymore. They were obvious, like beams in a house. He could tell where they were strong and where they'd been patched. Hermione's eyes were on him like she was trying to read a book that had never been written. Harry's mind raced. He swallowed. His voice sounded strange to himself. I can feel it. Kingsley stepped closer. What do you feel? Harry's gaze flicked to the castle, and for a heartbeat he felt the wards around Hogwarts like a living skin, ancient, layered, proud. He felt the protective magic on the gates. The charms in the windows. The countless small spells embedded in stone and wooden history. He also felt something else. A faint vibration in those wards. Like a thread being pulled. Like the world had been nudged and was slowly, subtly drifting off balance. Harry let go of the fragment. The warmth stayed. His hand felt normal. His pulse felt normal. But the air did not. A torch near the courtyard path flared suddenly, flames stretching too high, then snapping back down. A small, harmless thing, but too sharp, too fast. Ron flinched. Hermione didn't answer. She was staring at the case. Her face pale in a way Harry didn't like. Kingsley closed the lid slowly, like he was putting a dangerous animal back to sleep. You've confirmed the unspeakable's concern, he said quietly. Harry's mouth was dry. What concern? Kingsley met his eyes. That it recognizes you. That it chose you. Harry's scar prickled again, but not with pain. With anticipation. And in the back of his mind, behind his own thoughts, Harry could still hear that distant thunder laughter, like a god smiling at a joke only it understood. Hermione's voice came out small and sharp. Harry, we need to get you away from people. If it's affecting. It's not affecting anything, Harry said automatically. Then a name on the memorial stone flickered. Not the letters themselves, those were carved deep. The enchantment that made the engraving resistant to time and erosion rippled for half a second, as if the spell had briefly forgotten what it was supposed to be. Harry felt it like a nerve twitch. His stomach dropped. He hadn't cast anything. He hadn't done anything. He'd only touched a piece of metal. Kingsley's face tightened, but he didn't look surprised. That was almost worse. Ron moved closer to Harry, as if he could physically shield him from whatever this was. Okay, Ron said, voice low. Nope, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Hermie. One was already thinking faster than fear. We need a controlled environment. We need baseline testing. We need to know if it's a curse disguised as a blessing, Harry finished, because the word surfaced in his mind with a strange sweetness. Hermione's eyes snapped to him. Harry didn't like that either. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. They didn't shake. But he could still feel the castle's magic now. Like a second heartbeat beneath the world. And under that heartbeat, a faint, growing discord. Like the beginning of a song that didn't belong here. Harry lifted his head and stared at Hogwarts. For the first time since the war ended, he felt something that wasn't grief or exhaustion. He felt change. And somewhere beyond the sky, beyond the world, beyond anything a wand could touch. Something laughed again, softly, as if the first gate had opened. Harry didn't sleep. Not properly. He lay on his back in the small guest room McGonagall had insisted. Ted Hughes, you're not sleeping in a tent on the grounds again, Potter, I don't care what you did in the war, and stared at the ceiling until the darkness went thin and gray. It wasn't nightmares this time. Not Voldemort. Not screams. Not the kind of memories that clawed. It was quieter. Worse, in a way. Because the silence had texture now. He could feel Hogwarts breathing. Not metaphorically. Not as a sentimental thought. He could feel the wards the way he could feel his own pulse. Layered, ancient, and slightly irritated. Like a great creature asleep under the castle had rolled over and found a thorn in its side. Every time he closed his eyes, the same thought returned. I can see magic. He could feel it in the mattress, tiny charms woven into the fabric to keep it from fraying. A warmth spell meant to fight the damp chill of the Scottish hills. He could taste the protective runes in the doorframe without even looking at them. And underneath all that, like a hairline crack in glass, there was the faint, persistent tremor of wrongness. At dawn, he gave up. He dressed quietly, left the room, and walked the corridors as if he still had lessons to be late for. The portraits watched him. Some smiled, some frowned, some pretended not to. A few muttered, "Poor boy," as if he couldn't hear. One portrait, an old witch with a hawk nose, stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was a prophecy or a plague. He stopped near a window overlooking the courtyard. The sun spilled through in pale gold. Students were already outside, laughing too loudly, as if volume could keep fear away. Ron found him there, hair sticking up in a way that suggested he'd fought his pillow and lost. "You're up," Ron said, like it was an accusation. Harry didn't look away from the window. "You too." Ron shuffled closer and leaned on the stone beside him. "Hermione's in the library." "Obviously. Obviously." Ron's eyes flicked to Harry's forehead. "Scar." Harry rubbed it out of habit. "Quiet." Ron made a sound that wasn't relief. "That's not comforting." Harry almost smiled. Almost. They didn't speak again until Hermione arrived, arms full of books as if she'd tried to physically carry certainty. "I found references," she said immediately, breathless. Not good references, but enough to confirm what Kingsley said. There are mentions of Discord artifacts in a few old translated texts, mostly dismissed as myth, but, Harry, the structure of the enchantment on that fragment. "I didn't look at it," Harry said. Hermione stopped. "You didn't?" "No." He exhaled. "I didn't want to make it worse." Ron grimaced. "Smart, for once." Hermione ignored him, eyes sharp on Harry. "How do you feel?" Harry hesitated. That was the problem. He didn't know how to answer anymore. Feelings were too big, too messy. But this wasn't just a feeling. It was an awareness. "It's like," Harry searched for words that didn't exist. "Like I'm standing in a room where I can hear every clock ticking. Even the ones in the walls." Hermione's mouth tightened thoughtfully. "Sensitivity. Enhanced magical perception. And it's not just perception," Harry said quietly. "It's like, the magic around me is restless." Ron swore under his breath again. Hermione took a breath as if she'd been holding it since yesterday. "Okay. Good. That's information. We can work with information." "Can we?" Harry asked. Hermione's eyes didn't flinch. "We have to." They moved to a small classroom McGonagall allowed them to use, empty except for old desks, a chalkboard, and a lingering smell of ink and dust. Hermione claimed the teacher's table like she'd been born to it, stacking books into a fortress. Ron sat sideways in a chair, one leg bouncing. Harry stood near the window because he couldn't stand sitting still with the castle's wards humming against his skin. Hermione pulled out parchment and a quill. Ron blinked. "You're taking notes." Hermione gave him a look. "Of course I'm taking notes." Harry watched her write the words baseline observations in neat, controlled script. Hermione glanced up. "We start simple. No artifact. No ministry. Just you. We check if the effects appear when you cast normally." Harry swallowed. "All right." Hermione slid her own wand aside. "You cast. I observe." Ron raised his hands. "I observe too. With my eyes. Like a normal person." Hermione ignored him again. "Start with a lumos." Harry lifted his wand. The spell came easily, too easily. It wasn't the usual push of intent through wood and core. It was like opening a tap. Lumos. Light blossomed at the tip. Bright and clean. Hermione leaned forward, eyes narrowed, watching the glow. "Intensity is higher than typical. But stable." Harry frowned. It felt stable to him. It felt friendly. Ron squinted at the wand tip. "Looks like light." Hermione scribbled notes anyway. "Now Nox." Harry extinguished it. Again, smooth. Hermione nodded once. "Okay. Next, Reparo. S." He pointed to a cracked ink bottle on the table. Harry hadn't noticed it before. It looked like an old spill had dried into the wood. Harry cast. Reparo. The glass sealed. The crack vanished. The ink inside shifted, then thickened. Turning darker, richer, like it had been brewed stronger. Hermione froze. Ron leaned closer. "Ah, that ink looks angry." Harry stared at the bottle. "I didn't. I know you didn't, Hermione said. But her voice had changed. Less controlled. You repaired the container and altered the contents. Harry's stomach went cold. Is that possible? Hermione's quill hovered. Not like that. Not without a separate transfiguration, and even then, ink isn't a fixed substance, it's— She stopped, eyes narrowing further. Do it again. Different object. Ron groaned. Of course. Hermione produced a chipped teacup from her bag like she'd planned the universe to match her paranoia. She set it down. Harry repaired it. Perfectly. But the floral pattern on the cup changed. Not dramatically. Just— one flower became a slightly different shade, and a tiny vine curled in a new direction. Harry felt it happen like a ripple under his skin. Hermione's voice was very quiet. The spell is— adding. Ron's bouncing leg stopped. Adding what? Hermione looked up at Harry, and for a moment she didn't look like Hermione, she looked like a girl who'd spent years believing rules could save you. Variance, she said. The magic is treating your intent as negotiable. Harry's throat tightened. So I can't even repair a cup without it changing. Hermione's gaze flicked to the window. Beyond it, Hogwarts students were laughing. You can, she said, soft. You just can't guarantee what it becomes. Ron's voice turned sharp. So what happens when he casts something bigger? Silence. Harry didn't want to test bigger. He could still see the way the memorial spell had flickered. The way something as sacred as a name had momentarily forgotten what it was supposed to be. Hermione swallowed, then forced herself into motion again. We don't jump to bigger. We map the edges. Harry, try a shield charm. Just a small one. Harry hesitated. Hermione, please, she said, and it wasn't command. It was fear dressed as science. Harry lifted his wand. Protega. The shield formed instantly, stronger than he expected, a shimmering barrier that looked almost textured. Like the surface of water in moonlight. Hermione's eyes widened. That's unusually dense. Ron leaned back. That one's good. Keep that one. Harry held the shield, feeling it hum. It felt right. Like his magic had finally found a way to fit his body instead of ripping through it. Then the shield shivered. A faint crack appeared in the air, no sound, just the sense of something tearing. For a heartbeat. The barrier reflected not the classroom, but a different scene. A sun-bleached shoreline, stone columns, and a golden sky that didn't belong in Scotland. Harry's breath caught. The image vanished, and the shield snapped back into place. Hermione's quill scratched furiously. Harry, that was not a normal spell reaction. Ron's face had gone pale. Did anyone else see that? Harry dropped the shield. The air settled. His hands were shaking now. He didn't like how close that felt. Like the world had blinked and shown him something behind it. Hermione stepped closer, voice low. Visions. Harry swallowed. Not exactly. It felt like the spell looked somewhere else. Hermione's eyes darted to her notes, then back to him. Cross-referential resonance. Like, your magic briefly connected to another. She stopped herself. No. That's ridiculous. Ron snorted weakly. Welcome to our lives. Harry pressed his fingers to his forehead. The scar didn't burn, the warmth inside him stirred like embers. Hermione exhaled slowly, then softened. Okay. Stop. That's enough for today. Harry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ron stood abruptly. I vote we lock him in a cupboard until this blows over. Hermione glared. Ron shrugged. Joke. Mostly. They left the classroom and walked in silence toward the Great Hall. Hogwarts felt too awake today. Too alive. Like it was listening. In the corridor, they passed a second year trying to levitate a stack of books. The books wobbled, spun, and then, without warning, shot straight up. Smacking the ceiling before dropping in a perfect pile again. The student yelped. I didn't do that. A friend laughed nervously. Maybe the castle likes you. Harry stopped walking. He felt it. Not in the student's wand. Not in the books. In the air. A tiny, invisible tug at the fabric of how spells were supposed to behave. Like someone had loosened a screw. Hermione noticed his expression instantly. Harry. It's spreading, Harry whispered. Ron frowned. What is? Harry looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The wobble. The wrongness. It's not just me casting. It's around me. Hermione's voice was steady, but her eyes were not. Proximity effect. Harry's stomach turned. They continued walking, but now every sound felt like a warning. In the great hall, breakfast was loud with plates clattering and voices rising. Harry sat with Hermione and Ron near the end of the Gryffindor table, trying to ignore the way his presence seemed to make the air twitchy. He reached for a piece of toast. The toast slid toward him a little too smoothly, like it wanted to be taken. Harry froze. Ron followed his gaze. "It's toast, mate." Hermione's eyes narrowed. "Don't." But Harry had already felt it. The toast didn't just move. It complied. Like the universe had decided that giving Harry what he wanted was the easiest way to create something else later. A small kindness now, a debt later. Harry pulled his hand back. The toast stopped moving. Hermione's quill appeared again like a reflex. She scribbled one line and underlined it twice. Harry glanced at the parchment. Magic is anticipating intent. He didn't know why that line scared him more than almost anything. Because intent wasn't just desire. Intent was choice. And if something else could anticipate your choices. Hermione leaned closer, voice barely audible over the hall. "Harry, I think it's learning you." Harry stared at the butter knife on the table as if it might turn into something else. In the back of his mind, faint as distant thunder, the laughter returned, not loud, not cruel. Just amused. Like a god listening to a board game piece realize it's on a board. The Ministry of Magic had always smelled like polished stone and old decisions. Harry noticed it the moment he stepped out of the fireplace into the atrium, that faint bite of flow ash in the air, he sweep of enchanted light across marble, the echo of footsteps that sounded too important to belong to ordinary people. It felt wrong to be here again. Not because he hated the place, though he'd add his reasons, but because the ministry was built on one thing above all others. Control. And Harry could feel, like a splinter under his skin, that control loosening wherever he stood. Kingsley met them before the lifts. His expression unreadable in the way only truly competent people managed. He didn't waste time with greetings. He didn't say thank you for coming, because it wasn't a favor. It was gravity. "Potter," he said quietly. "Granger." "Weasley." Ron muttered, mourning, like it physically pained him. Hermione gave a brisk nod. "Minister." Kingsley's eyes flicked across Harry's face, his scar, his posture. The tension in his hands. Harry didn't like being assessed like a situation, but he understood it. "Short version," Kingsley said, lowering his voice as they walked. He had 3 incidents in 48 hours. Containment charms behaving unpredictably. Household spells in Diagon Alley looping on themselves. A ward line in Kent collapsed and then reformed, incorrectly. Hermione's gaze sharpened. Incorrectly how? Kingsley's jaw tightened. It repelled the wrong thing. Harry's stomach went cold. Muggles. Kingsley didn't answer, which was an answer. They reached the lifts. The golden grills slid shut, and the lift began to descend. As it moved, Harry felt the ministry's wards pressing close, layered protections, secrecy charms, detection webs. Old see their structure the way he'd seen Hogwarts. This was different magic, newer, more bureaucratic, more patched. A wall built by people who assumed the wall would hold forever. Hermione leaned slightly toward Harry. "Remember, don't push it." "I'm not pushing anything," Harry whispered back. "That's what I'm afraid of," she said. The lift opened onto a lower level Harry didn't recognize. The corridor was cleaner, brighter, and strangely quiet. There were no portraits here. No little enchantments for comfort. The air had the sterile feel of a place where magic was treated like a weapon and a liability, not a miracle. Kingsley led them to a set of double doors guarded by 2 Aurors. They nodded sharply at him, then at Harry, then looked away like eye contact might invite a curse. Inside was a large chamber with a wide demonstration space in the center, white stone flooring marked with engraved runes. A row of observers stood behind a glass partition, ministry officials, a Fae. Grim-faced witches and wizards in plain robes, and several people Harry recognized from photographs more than real life, unspeakables, faces half shadowed by the way they carried secrecy around them like a cloak. On the floor, in the middle of the runic circle, sat a black iron trunk chained shut. Kingsley stopped beside Harry. "This is a controlled trial. Nothing happens without my say." Ron snorted. "That's comforting." Kingsley ignored him and addressed the room. "Begin." A witch in thick protective gloves stepped forward. Her robes were marked with official insignia, Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. She raised her wand and spoke clearly. Containment Protocol 7. The runes on the floor lit up in a soft blue ring. A dome of shimmering force rose around the trunk like a bubble. Harry felt it immediately. The spell was beautiful in a harsh way, tight, layered, redundant protections stacked on top of each other. It was designed to withstand hostile magic, internal pressure, external sabotage. And it was trembling. Not visibly. Not yet. But Harry could feel it straining as if some unseen hand was testing the seams. Hermione's fingers lightly caught his sleeve. A silent reminder, stay still. The witch gestured to a second official, who approached the trunk and cast a diagnostic charm. Revelio. A pale light passed over the iron. For a heartbeat, everything held. Then the containment dome hiccuped. It wasn't a collapse. It was worse. It changed its mind. The blue ring of runes flickered, and the shimmer turned the wrong shade, greenish, sickly. As if the spell had been rewritten mid-breath. The diagnostic light bent and refracted, not across the trunk, but across the observers behind the glass, splintering into sharp, needle-thin beams that struck the partition. The glass didn't crack. It sighed, like it had been insulted. Ron swore loudly. The witch snapped, stabilize. 3 wands lifted at once. 3 voices spoke in quick succession. Protega Maxima. Finite. Anchor Charm. Harry felt the magic surge, order trying to brute force itself back into place. The runes flared bright as a warning. And then, as if the universe found the struggle funny, the containment dome did something none of them expected. It didn't shatter outward. It folded inward like fabric. The shimmering bubble collapsed in on itself, compressing, tightening, until it became a thin, gleaming sheath around the trunk's chains. For half a second, Harry thought, oh. It worked. It's holding tighter. Then the chains rattled, and the trunk's lock clicked open. Hermione gasped. The witch screamed, no. The trunk lid lifted by itself. Not fast. Not with violent force. Just, casually. Like a person opening a cupboard. Darkness spilled out. Not smoke, no. It was too thick for smoke. It was the absence of light, pouring in slow ribbons that coiled over the runes. A cold hit the room so sharply Harry's lungs seized. The observers behind the glass stepped back. Someone shouted. Someone else started casting. Kingsley moved first, stepping in front of Harry so quickly it was almost a blur. His wand was up, and his voice cut through the panic like steel. Lock it down. A heavy ward slammed into place over the chamber. The doors sealed. The runes on the floor flared white-hot. Hermione's grip on Harry's sleeve tightened until it hurt. Harry didn't move. He couldn't. Because the darkness coming out of the trunk recognized him the way the fragment had. It leaned toward him, not like a creature with eyes. Like a thought turning its attention. Harry's scar warmed, not burning, waking. And in that instant, Harry understood something terrifying. This wasn't random. The magic wasn't just misfiring. It was choosing. The darkness hovered at the edge of the runic circle, as if deciding whether to cross. The Ministry's wards fought it, tightening, humming, groaning under the pressure. Harry felt the strained points, where the runes were strong, where they were patched, where human arrogance had assumed, good enough. And then, without meaning to, he noticed a weak seam in the ward. The moment he noticed it, the darkness slid toward it like water finding a crack. Hermione's voice was a hiss in his ear. Harry, don't think. Too late. The seam flared. The runes stuttered. A section of the ward line unraveled like thread pulled from a sleeve. And the darkness squeezed through, a thin ribbon slipping past the containment field. Straight toward the glass partition. A ministry official behind the glass raised his wand. Face white. Stupefy. The red jet hit the ribbon of darkness. And turned into a shower of orange sparks that scattered harmlessly like fireworks. The official stared, stunned. The darkness tapped the glass. Once. The glass rippled. Twice. The glass shifted. Not breaking. Not shattering. It simply decided it no longer wanted to be between people and danger. The partition melted sideways like it was made of water, spilling the observers into open air. Panic detonated. People shouted. Wands flashed. Someone screamed as a spell ricocheted off the ceiling and blasted a chunk of stone into dust. The room filled with the smell of burned magic. Kingsley roared, "Stop casting. You're feeding it." Harry's heart slammed against his ribs. He could see it now, clear as anything. Every frantic spell, every contradictory command, every panicked attempt to control the situation. It was pouring fuel onto a fire. Because the blessing didn't feed on darkness. It fed on discord. Harry moved without thinking, not forward into the circle. Not to attack the darkness. To do the only thing he could think of that wasn't chaos. Simplify. He raised his wand. Hermione grabbed his wrist. Harry. Harry's voice came out low, steady, almost foreign to him. Everyone, quiet. No spell. Just command. It shouldn't have mattered. But the air around him shifted. The blessing inside him stirred, warm as an ember, and the room hesitated. Like it was listening to him. For one heartbeat, the shouting faltered. Harry seized that thin slice of silence and cast the simplest magic he knew. Protega. A shield burst out, not a dome, not a wall, but a clean, flat barrier between the ribbon of darkness and the observers. It shimmered with that same moonwater texture he'd seen at Hogwarts. The darkness touched it. Harry expected resistance. Instead, the shield absorbed the darkness like ink soaking into parchment. His stomach lurched. The warmth in his veins flared. As if he'd swallowed a spark. The darkness didn't disappear. It didn't die. It became contained. Inside his spell. Inside his influence. Kingsley stared at Har. Why, like he'd just watched someone catch a falling blade barehanded. Potter, drop it. Harry tried. Nox, finite. He threw spells like a drowning man throws air. The shield remained. Not because it was too strong. Because it had become something else. Hermione's hands were on Harry's arm now, steadying him. Harry, breathe. Don't fight it with 10 spells. One spell. One rule. Harry swallowed hard. His vision blurred at the edges. One spell. One rule. Order. He forced himself to focus on the simplest truth he could cling to. This shield is a boundary. And boundaries only work if you believe in them. Harry held the thought like a nail driven into wood. Slowly, painfully, the shimmer stopped pulsing. The darkness inside the shield stilled. It flattened, like an animal settling under a hand that didn't hesitate. Then Kingsley stepped forward, wand precise. Anchor. A thin silver line shot from Kingsley's wand and locked onto Harry's shield, tethering it to the runic circle on the floor. The shield shivered, then held steady. Another witch approached, hands shaking, and cast a sealing charm around the trunk. This time, with Kingsley barking exact instructions, the containment spell formed cleanly, no contradictions, no shouting, no overlapping commands. The trunk slammed shut. The chains snapped tight. The runes dimmed. Silence fell in the aftermath, heavy as rubble. Harry's arms trembled. The warmth in his veins felt satisfied. That terrified him more than the darkness had. Kingsley stared at him. His face was controlled, but Harry could see the strain behind it, like a man holding a dam shut with his hands. You didn't just shield, Kingsley said quietly. You redirected. Harry swallowed. I didn't mean to. Hermione's voice was tight. He noticed a seam. Kingsley's eyes sharpened. You can see ward structures. Harry nodded once, helpless. Ron stepped in, voice sharp. And apparently his noticing things makes them worse. Kingsley didn't deny it. One of the observers, an older wizard with ink-stained fingers and the dead-eyed calm of an unspeakable, spoke from the back, voice like parchment tearing. It's not that he's breaking the rules. Everyone turned. The unspeakable's gaze locked on Harry. It's that the rules are renegotiating around him. Harry's skin went cold. Hermione's jaw clenched. That's not how magic works. The unspeakable tilted his head slightly. Until it is. Kingsley cut in sharply. Enough. He looked at Harry, and for a moment Harry saw something in his eyes that wasn't minister or aura or authority. He saw the weight of a man trying to keep a country from tearing itself apart. This demonstration was meant to reassure the department heads, Kingsley said, voice controlled. It will do the opposite. As if to prove him right, a door on the far side of the chamber banged open and a harried secretary rushed in, pale and breathless. Minister, there are reporters in the atrium. Someone leaked. There's talk of a containment failure and, the secretary's gaze flicked to Harry and flinched. And they're saying it's because he's here. Ron's face twisted. Of course they are. Hermione's hands curled into fists. This is going to become a story, Harry finished softly. He could already see it, headlines. The boy who lived, now the boy who breaks magic. People who didn't understand, filling the gaps with fear. Kingsley stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. Potter, I need you to cooperate with the Department of Mysteries. Harry's throat tightened. To study me. To understand what's happening before it becomes a catastrophe, Kingsley corrected, but there was no warmth in the correction. Only urgency. Hermione's voice turned sharp. He's not a specimen. Kingsley met her stare. No. He's the epicenter of a phenomenon that nearly let a classified dark object breach containment in a ministry chamber. Harry looked down at his trembling hands. He remembered how the darkness had leaned toward him. How his shield had absorbed it like it belonged there. How the warmth inside him had flared like approval. A faint sound echoed in the back of his mind, distant, amused thunder. Not loud enough for anyone else. But loud enough for him. Kingsley's voice softened, just slightly. Harry, if you walk away from this, it will still follow you. And it will follow everyone near you. Ron muttered, brilliant. Hermione swallowed, eyes glossy with anger and fear. We need conditions. Oversight. Transparency. Kingsley nodded once. Agreed. But we start today. Harry lifted his head. The ministry lights glinted off the marble, cold and perfect. He could feel the wards trembling under the surface, as if they'd learned fear. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a crack in glass. Fine, Harry said, voice flat. But I'm not your weapon. Kingsley held his gaze. Then don't become theirs. Outside, the noise of distant voices rose, reporters, officials. Panic moving through corridors like fire through dry grass. And inside Harry, the blessing hummed, warm, patient, and far too pleased. The Department of Mysteries didn't feel like the ministry. It felt like the ministry's shadow. Harry had been down here once, years ago, during that night that still lived in his bones. Black doors, endless corridors, the sense reality itself had been stacked into filing cabinets. Back then, he'd been a kid running on adrenaline and prophecy. Now he walked beside Kingsley with Hermione and Ron at his flanks, and the corridor seemed tighter. Not physically, magically. The air was layered with silencing wards so heavy Harry could taste them. The enchantments weren't just meant to conceal sound, they were meant to conceal conclusions. Hermione hated it already. Harry could tell by the way her mouth kept setting into a hard line. An unspeakable waited at the end of the corridor, standing very still as if movement might be recorded. Their hood was down, but their face carried that same blank calm Harry remembered, not emotionless, exactly, just trained not to show what mattered. Minister Shacklebolt, the unspeakable greeted. Unspeakable Vance. Kingsley replied. Vance's gaze slid to Harry. Potter. Harry didn't like how it sounded down here. Names echoed differently, like they were being filed away. Vance nodded once to Hermione and Ron. Granger. Weasley. You're not cleared for all rooms. Hermione's eyes flashed. I'm cleared to stand beside Harry when you're treating him like an experiment. Vance didn't blink. You're cleared to stand beside him in this room. If you disrupt the containment protocols, you'll be removed. Ron's hand tightened around his wand. Hermione didn't look at him. But Harry felt the quiet agreement between them. Try it and we'll burn this place down. Kingsley stepped between them with a sigh that said he'd been negotiating impossible people since before any of them were born. We do this cleanly, he said. No power games. Vance turned, robes whispering, and led them through a door that looked like every other black door, until it opened. Inside was a chamber that didn't belong underground. The ceiling was high and dim, but it wasn't stone. It was something that looked like night held in place, dark and soft and too deep to measure. The walls were lined with runic frames and glass instruments that clicked and hummed like impatient insects. In the center of the room sat a wide circular platform engraved with symbols Harry didn't recognize, or rang. Like an equation pretending to be art. And on the platform, in a suspended crystal cylinder, was the fragment. The leaf-shaped sliver gleamed faintly in the low light, warm as a living thing. Harry's scar prickled. Not pain. Recognition. Vance spoke briskly. You will not touch it. Harry's voice came out dry. I wasn't planning to. That's good, Vance said, tone neutral. Because the last time you did. Hogwarts. Wards twitched. The last time it was brought into the ministry, our containment protocols, Vance's mouth tightened by a fraction, rearranged themselves. Hermione stepped forward, eyes fixed on the runic circle. You're measuring variance. Vance looked at her for the first time like she was a real person. Yes. Hermione's voice sharpened. Show me your baseline. Vance didn't answer her directly. Instead, they gestured to the platform. Potter will stand there. Harry walked onto the circle. The runes under his boots warmed faintly, like they'd noticed him. Ron hovered at the edge like a guard dog. Hermione stood with her arms folded, jaw tight, eyes scanning the instruments. Vance moved to a console of glass and silver. We're going to run a series of tests. Simple charms. Controlled environment. No surprises. Harry almost laughed. That's what you said upstairs. Vance didn't react. The difference is, here, we record the math. Hermione muttered, magic isn't math. Vance's gaze slid to her, mild. Magic is law. Law is math with consequences. Hermione went very still. Kingsley stayed near the door, watching everything like he was counting exits. Vance raised a hand. Test 1. Standard charm. Lumos. Full incantation. Precise movement. Harry lifted his wand, took a breath, and forced himself to be deliberate. Not the easy, tap-like casting he'd felt since the fragment. He made the wand movement exactly as he'd been taught. Lumos. Light bloomed. Immediately, the instruments around the room ticked and chimed. Lines of pale ink appeared on a scroll-fed device, measures Harry didn't understand. Hermione leaned forward. Your deviation is low. Harry blinked. You can read that. I can infer it, Hermione snapped, then softer. To herself, the stabilizers aren't flaring. Vance nodded. Variance is within acceptable boundaries. Harry's chest loosened slightly. So if I'm careful, it's fine. Vance's voice was flat. Test 2. A second unspeakable stepped into view, silent, masked with a hood. They cast a simple levitation charm at a quill placed on a pedestal. Wingardium Leviosa. The quill rose, steady. Vance looked at Harry. Now you. Harry cast. The quill lifted. For a heartbeat it was normal. Then the quill spun once, unnecessary, graceful, and inked a thin black line in the air as if writing on invisible paper. Hermione's eyes widened. That's not part of the spell. The quill completed the line and stopped, hovering politely, as if it hadn't just rewritten reality's etiquette. Ron stared. That quill just got artistic. Harry's stomach tightened. I didn't do that. Vance's fingers moved over the console. No. But your presence nudged the spell into a variant expression. Hermione's voice was sharp. Why that expression? Vance paused. That's the question. Test after test continued. Simple repairs. Mild warming charms. A cleaning spell that left a faint scent of citrus no one had asked for. A shielding charm that became slightly too reflective, briefly showing the caster's own face warped like water. Every time Harry cast with strict precision, the deviations were small. Still there, but small. Then Vance changed the parameters. Test 7, Vance said. Multiple casters. Overlapping intent. 2 unspeakables stepped into the circle's outer ring. Hermione stiffened immediately. We will cast 3 separate spells simultaneously, Vance explained. Not hostile. Merely conflicting in purpose. Ron frowned. Why would anyone do that? Vance's tone remained neutral. The Ministry does it constantly. So does society. Hermione's mouth tightened like she hated how true that was. Vance nodded once. Begin. 1 unspeakable cast a cooling charm aimed at a heated stone on the pedestal. Another cast a warming charm at the same stone. The third cast a hardening charm to stabilize it. 3 spells. 3 intentions. 1 target. For a moment, the stone glowed, caught between contradictory demands. Harry felt the room tense. The instruments around the platform began to tick faster. Then the stone did something that made no magical sense at all. It cracked, not from heat or cold, but from a sudden internal twist. Like the concept of temperature had been replaced with argument. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber. The stone split cleanly in 2. Hermione whispered, horrified, that's not thermodynamics. That's narrative. Ron looked at her. What? Hermione didn't take her eyes off the pedestal. It chose the outcome that creates the most conflict. Not the most energy. Not the most stability. Vance's mouth barely moved. Precisely. Harry's blood ran colder than the underground air. You're saying magic is picking the worst option. Vance corrected, almost gently. Not worst. Most divisive. Most destabilizing. Most likely to create cascading disagreement. Kingsley's voice was quiet, grim. That's what we've been seeing. Hermione stepped forward despite herself. So it's not random variance. It's biased variance. Vance's gaze held on Harry. Yes. And the bias increases when Potter is nearby. Harry's scar warmed again, like the statement had been a compliment. He hated that. Why me? Harry asked, voice rough. Why does it anchor to me? Vance didn't answer immediately. Instead, they gestured toward the crystal cylinder containing the fragment. Because the payload needed a carrier that society cannot ignore. Harry's hands curled. A hero. A symbol, Vance corrected. A pressure point. Hermione's voice turned tight. This is not about Harry being special. This is about someone using him. Vance's eyes flicked, acknowledging. Yes. Ron's voice rose. So who? Vance didn't speak the name. They didn't have to. Harry felt it, like a distant grin. A ripple of amused thunder at the edge of his thoughts. Vance turned a dial on the console. Test 12. Intent manipulation. Hermione bristled. No. Vance ignored her. Potter will cast a simple spell with a clear, benevolent goal. We will introduce a conflicting social stimulus. Ron snapped. A what? Vance gestured. And a small object appeared on the pedestal, a child's toy broom, cracked and taped together. Harmless. Pathetic. Something that looked like it belonged to a kid who didn't have money for a new one. Harry's throat tightened unexpectedly. Vance spoke evenly. Repair it. Harry stepped forward, wand raised, and focused on the simplest kindness, make it whole. Reparo. The toy broom mended. The crack sealed. The tape vanished. For a heartbeat, it was perfect. Then the bristles shifted, sharpened slightly, stiffening like they'd been cut into points. The handle darkened, taking a polished sheen that looked expensive. Harry blinked. What? Hermione's eyes narrowed. It improved it. Ron frowned. That's good, isn't it? Hermione snapped. No. It's a toy for a child. Why? Oh, you don't upgrade it into something that looks stolen. Ron's face hardened. Oh, come off it. Hermione whirled on him. I'm serious, Ron. That change creates suspicion. Someone sees that they think it was taken or enchanted illegally. Ron's voice rose. Or they think someone did something nice. Hermione's eyes flashed. In this climate, with the ministry panicking, with people already whispering about Harry, they'll think it's. Harry felt it then. Not the argument itself. Arguments happened. Ron and Hermione were practically built out of them. He felt the blessing respond. Warm. Delighted. Like a dog wagging its tail at the sound of its owner's voice. The instruments around the room spiked, needles jumping, runes flaring. The air tightened as if reality itself leaned toward the conflict, hungry. Harry stepped back, heart hammering. Stop. Hermione and Ron froze mid-breath. Hermione looked at Harry, suddenly pale. Harry. It likes it, Harry whispered. He swallowed, throat burning. It likes when we fight. Vance's voice was calm as a scalpel. Yes. It uses disagreement as a lever. Hermione's fists clenched. So you deliberately provoked us. Vance didn't deny it. We needed proof of sensitivity to social contradiction. Ron stared at the toy broom like it had betrayed him. So if we argue, magic gets worse. Kingsley's voice was quiet, heavy. That's why the ministry's been failing. Departments contradicting each other. Orders and counter-orders. Panic layered on panic. Hermione took a slow breath, forcing herself into control. There has to be a mitigation strategy. Vance nodded once. There is. For Potter, specifically. They gestured, and the runes under Harry's feet changed, subtle, shifting into a more structured pattern. A new circle overlaid the old one. Like a contract written over a draft. Ritual constraint, Vance said. Full incantations. Precise movements. Anchoring runes. One caster at a time. No overlaps. No improvisation. Hermione's eyes narrowed, like forcing the universe into a single interpretation. Vance inclined their head. Exactly. Harry swallowed. And it works. Vance's gaze held steady. It reduces deviation. It does not remove the bias. Harry's stomach sank. So it's always there. Yes, Vance said. And it will grow. Hermione's voice tightened. How do you know? Vance tapped the console. A strip of parchment slid out, covered in numbers and runes and diagrams that made Harry's eyes ache. Hermione leaned in, scanning it fast. Her face changed. Harry, she said softly, your deviation curve. Harry's voice came out brittle. Tell me. Hermione swallowed. It's accelerating. Ron went very still. Kingsley closed his eyes briefly like a man hearing the first crack in a dam. How long? He asked. Vance's voice was quiet. At current growth, we reach systemic instability within weeks. Maybe less, if public fear spikes. Hermione's gaze snapped up. Public fear. Vance's eyes flicked to the door. Reporters. Rumors. Factions forming. People casting spells in anger and panic, contradictions everywhere. Harry's scar warmed again, as if the thought of the world unraveling was a pleasant forecast. He clenched his jaw until it hurt. Hermione stepped closer, voice low and fierce. This isn't just a curse. It's a mechanism. Vance nodded. A Trojan device. Ron's voice came out rough. So who built it? Vance didn't answer directly. Instead, they lifted a gloved hand and traced a symbol in the air with their wand tip. A simple shape formed in pale light for a moment. An apple. Not a fruit you could eat, an icon. A promise. Then it vanished. Harry's vision blurred for a fraction of a second, and in that blink he saw stone columns and a sky too gold to be real. He heard laughter at the edge of the world, distant thunder, amused and patient. A hero, after a war. Harry's hands trembled. He forced himself to breathe, slow and deliberate, like Vance's ritual constraints demanded. One rule. One thought. One boundary. But even as he steadied himself, he felt the truth press against his ribs. This wasn't just happening to him. It was happening through him. And somewhere far beyond the Ministry's wards, beyond Britain, beyond wizard kind. Something waited for the moment the blessing stopped pretending to be kind. The first time Harry saw it happen in public, it looked like a miracle. It was Diagon Alley on a damp afternoon, busy in that tense, pretending to be normal way it had adopted since the war. Shopkeepers smiled too hard. Aurors walked routes they tried to make look casual. People spoke in careful voices, as if the wrong volume might wake something sleeping under the street. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had come because Kingsley asked, because information was leaking, because the Ministry needed eyes that weren't already drowned in politics. Also, because Harry couldn't sit still anymore. The blessing didn't let him. It hummed inside his veins whenever he tried to rest, like a song that grew louder in silence. They were passing the apothecary when a shout cut through the alley. A child, maybe 12, stood outside Madame Malkin's, face pale. Eyes wide. A tall witch loomed over him, wand raised. You broke it, she snapped. You broke my clasp, do you know how much that costs? I didn't, the boy stammered, hands up, shaking. She bumped into me. A crowd formed, not a large one, but enough. Enough for pressure. Enough for judgment. Enough for discord. Harry felt it as soon as the circle of attention tightened, a subtle tug in the air, like invisible fingers pulling at threads. The witch's wand flicked. Accio clasp. A small silver clasp shot out of a cloth bag on the ground, except it didn't fly neatly into her hand. It veered, twisted midair, and struck the boy in the chest hard enough to knock him back against the shop window. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted. Another voice rose in anger. The witch's face flickered from outrage to shock. I didn't. The boy winced, clutching his chest, eyes glossy with pain. Harry stepped forward instinctively. Hermione's hand caught his sleeve, hard. Don't, she hissed. Not yet. But Ron was already moving, tall, furious, and done with people. Are you mad? Ron barked at the witch. You nearly skewered him. I didn't mean, my spell. Your spell aimed fine, Ron snapped. It just decided to be cruel. That line, decided to be cruel, made something inside Harry flare warm, pleased. He hated it. The crowd muttered. People argued. A shopkeeper shouted that there were kids here. Someone else shouted that the boy should be arrested. Order and blame and fear knotted together. And then the miracle happened. The boy, still pressed against the window, breathing fast, lifted his hands, not his wand. He didn't have a wand. Harry knew because Harry could feel the lack like an empty socket. The boy's fingers trembled, and the clasp, the silver piece lying on the cobblestones, rose into the air. Not on a charm's familiar lift, not with a wand's guiding pull. It rose like a thought becoming real. The clasp floated gently, wobbling once, then drifted into the boy's palm with careful precision. Silence hit the crowd like a spell. The witch's mouth fell open. The boy stared at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. He whispered. I didn't, I didn't know I could do that. A murmur rippled outward. Awe, fear, excitement. A woman breathed, wandless. Someone else said, sharper, impossible. A third voice, young, hungry, said, it's happening. It's really happening. Harry felt Hermione go rigid beside him. Ron's head snapped toward Harry, eyes narrowed as if he could physically see the thread connecting them. That's not, Ron started. Hermione finished quietly, that's not a coincidence. Harry couldn't speak. Because the air around the boy was still buzzing, the residue of the witch's spell misfiring. The crowd's arguments, the pressure of everyone needing a story to make sense of what they'd seen. And the boy's wandless magic hadn't calmed it. It had answered it. Like the world had offered him power in exchange for creating a moment that would divide everyone watching. A miracle with splinters. Someone from the crowd stepped forward, a man with sharp eyes and a too eager smile. You did that without a wand, he said, voice bright. That's incredible. Do you know what that means? The boy shook his head, still trembling. It means you're free, the man said. Harry felt Hermione's breath catch. Ron muttered, oh no. The man turned slightly, addressing the crowd as if it belonged to him. We've been told our whole lives that magic needs a stick. Hat power is regulated by who gets trained, who gets licensed, who gets approved. He lifted his hands, palms outward in a preacher's gesture. But the war changed everything. And now magic is changing too. It's waking up in people who never had the chance. Hermione's voice was a whisper, tight with dread. Free hands. Harry had heard the word in passing, like a rumor of a rumor. A group foreman. In the cracks left by fear and possibility. People who believed the old rules had failed, and that the new instability was not a threat but a liberation. The man's gaze flicked, and for the first Harry saw recognition spark there, like he'd just noticed a celebrity walking through the crowd. His smile sharpened. And look, the man said, voice rising. Who's here to witness it? Harry Potter himself. The war hero. The symbol of surviving impossible magic. Whispers surged. Heads turned. Harry felt the attention land on him like a net. Some people looked relieved. Some looked accusing. Some looked hungry. Like they'd been starving for a reason to believe in something bigger than policy. A teenage girl near the back said, too loudly, my mum says it's because of him. Another voice snapped, shut up. Another voice countered, no, let her speak. Discord. Harry felt it bloom. Warmth surged inside him like someone stoking a fire. Hermione's hand tightened on his sleeve like an anchor. Ron stepped forward, shoulders broad, jaw set. Back off, Ron growled at the man. He's not your banner. The man didn't flinch. I'm not trying to claim him. I'm simply saying the world is changing. And perhaps Potter, perhaps he understands better than anyone what it's like to have power you didn't ask for. Harry met the man's eyes. And in that moment, Harry felt something else, something subtle and wrong. The man wasn't just excited. He was aiming, trying to push the crowd into a shape, trying to turn awe into a movement. Harry's skin prickled. Hermione whispered, don't engage. If you argue. I know, Harry said, but his voice sounded distant. Because the blessing inside him was humming now, as if this was the best music it had heard in weeks. A crowd, a miracle, fear, hope, accusation, worship, all the ingredients. Harry forced himself to breathe, slow, deliberate, ritual constraint the unspeakables had drilled into him. One rule, one boundary. But the crowd didn't follow rules. People didn't. A woman stepped forward, face pale. My cousin's spells keep changing, she said shakily. Last night her cleaning charm made the dishes shatter. Her children were in the kitchen. A man barked, that's why we need registration. Someone else yelled, that's why we need freedom from ministry control. The argument escalated, voices stacking, contradictions multiplying. Harry felt the air tighten like a rope pulled taut. And then, like a warning from the universe itself, a street lamp charm on the corner, one of those enchanted globes that kept Diagon Alley softly lit even when clouds rolled in, flickered. The light didn't just dim. It turned red. A harsh, blood-tinged glow spilled over faces. People froze, startled by their own shadows. Ron muttered, that's new. Hermione's voice was tight. It's responding. Harry felt it. The charm had chosen an expression that made everything look worse, more ominous, more likely to make people assume danger. A small child began to cry. The crowd tensed, fear rising like heat. Harry's heart hammered. He could let it happen. He could do nothing, and watch the panic spike, and watch the Trojan feed. Or, he could try to steer it. Not control. Not command. Just nudge. Tier 3. Discord. Harry lifted his wand slowly, carefully, making sure the movement was precise, not sharp enough to be seen as aggression. Not sloppy enough to invite variance. Hermione grabbed his wrist. Harry, no casting in a crowd. I'm not casting at them, Harry whispered. He closed his eyes for Alpha heartbeat and focused on one clean intention. Light should be light, not red, not dramatic, not a warning, a simple truth. Harry opened his eyes and spoke softly, so only Hermione and Ron heard the incantation. Lumos Veris. It wasn't a standard spell. Not strictly. More like a layered modification Hermione had once shown him in a book, an old charm meant to purify enchanted light sources, stripping them of reactive tinting spells. Harry had never cast it before. The wand movement felt inevitable. The street lamp's red glow shivered. For a moment, the light fought him, flickering between red and white like a heartbeat in conflict. Harry felt the blessing push back, warm and amused, as if saying, "No, no, let them fight, let them fear." Harry held his intention like a nail. The light snapped white again, clean, soft, ordinary. A few people exhaled without realizing they'd been holding their breath. The tension in the crowd eased slightly. Not peace, not resolution, but less ignition. Harry lowered his wand, chest tight. Ron stared at him. You just fixed the mood lighting. Hermione's eyes were wide, fixed on Harry's hand. You steered it. Harry swallowed. Barely. Hermione's voice was low, urgent. Harry, that wasn't a normal interaction. You didn't just cast a charm. She looked around at the crowd, at the arguments simmering, at the freehands Reacher still smiling like he'd tasted opportunity. You influenced the environment's magic. Ron's voice was rough. And did it feel good? Harry didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, yes. It felt good in the same way it felt good to breathe after being underwater. It felt like his magic finally fit his body. Like he wasn't wrestling it anymore. And that terrified him. Because the blessing felt good too. It felt like belonging. Kingsley's warning echoed in his head, don't become theirs. The crowd began to disperse, but not peacefully. People left in clusters, talking fast. Some looked back at Harry like he'd just proven something. Others looked back like he'd just confirmed their worst fear. The freehands man offered the boy a hand. Come with us, he said gently. We can teach you. We can help you understand what you are. The boy hesitated, eyes flicking toward the witch, toward the crowd, toward nowhere safe. Harry felt a sharp pang. He took a step forward before Hermione could stop him. He didn't address the preacher. He addressed the boy. Be careful, Harry said simply. The boy blinked. Just be careful, Harry repeated, voice firm. Power without control isn't freedom. It's a fire. The preacher's smile didn't fade. Spoken like someone who survived a fire. Harry met his eyes. Spoken like someone who doesn't want children to burn. For a fraction of a second. The preacher's expression hardened, annoyance flashing under charm. Then he nodded, still smiling. Of course, we want safety too. It sounded like a lie wearing good manners. Hermione pulled Harry back gently, voice barely a breath. We should go. Now. They walked quickly, leaving Diagon Alley behind. But the feeling followed them. Not footsteps. Not a shadow. A shift in the world. A sense that something had been activated. As they reached the leaky cauldron entrance, a faint crackle ran along the anti-muggle notice me not charm on the doorway. Harry felt it like a nerve twitch. Hermione froze mid-step. Did you feel that? Harry nodded slowly. Ron's face tightened. What now? Hermione's eyes were sharp with horror. That charm, it just weakened. Harry's stomach dropped. Because that charm wasn't just convenience. It was secrecy. It was the thin line between wizarding chaos and the entire muggle world noticing. Harry swallowed, voice hoarse. It's not staying contained. Hermione's hand found his sleeve again, but this time it wasn't just to hold him back. It was to hold on. Ron stared at the street outside, where ordinary London moved beyond the invisible boundary. Tell me, Ron said quietly, this isn't going to spill into. Harry's scar warmed faintly, like a god smiling at the question. Harry didn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew. If the Trojan horse was inside the gates would not hold forever. By the time they returned to the ministry, the atrium sounded like a storm trapped indoors. Voices ricocheted off marble. Papers fluttered like startled birds. Orators pushed through crowds with clipped urgency, trying to look like order while their eyes screamed fire. Harry stepped out of the flow and immediately felt it. The ministry's wards were tighter than before. Layered more aggressively. New lines braided into old ones like bandages wrapped too quickly around a bleeding wound. And underneath those wards, under the enchantments meant to keep the building calm and stable, there was a tremor of strain. It wasn't just magic misbehaving. It was people. Contradiction stacked on contradiction. Departments issuing overlapping directives, officials panicking and then trying to hide that panic behind authority. The blessing inside Harry stirred like a cat waking to the sound of food being poured. Hermione's hand clamped around Harry's sleeve. "Keep your breathing steady," she murmured. "Don't react to any of it." Ron scanned the crowd with a scowl. "This place looks like it's about to start punching itself." Kingsley emerged from a side corridor flanked by 2 senior Aurors and a witch from magical law enforcement with a face like carved granite. He looked exhausted in a way Harry had rarely seen on him, like a man running on duty alone. "Potter," Kingsley said, voice low. "Granger. Weasley. Come." They followed him past the fountain, past a cluster of reporters held back by a shimmering barrier. Someone shouted Harry's name. Another voice shouted, "Is it true you're breaking spells just by breathing?" Kingsley's jaw tightened. He didn't glance at them. He led them into a conference room where a dozen people waited around a long table. Some were officials Harry recognized, others had the cold posture of career survivors. In the corner stood 3 wizards and witches wearing plain gray cloaks with a small silver emblem pinned to the chest. A circle, a line, a kind of symbol that looked like a ward. Hermione noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed. "Who are they?" Kingsley's voice stayed careful. "Volunteer enforcement." Ron scoffed. "That's a fancy way to say vigilantes." One of the cloaked figures spoke, voice clipped. "We are citizens, assisting the ministry in maintaining order." Hermione's tone sharpened. "Order by whose definition?" The figure's gaze flicked to Harry, assessing. "By the definition necessary for survival." Harry felt the air tighten again. He felt the ministry's wards respond, subtle, eager, like dogs sensing a fight. Kingsley raised his hand. "Enough. We don't have time for ideology." He turned to the table. 3 hours ago, a ward line in Kent failed. 15 minutes later, we had a wandless surge in Diagon Alley. 30 minutes after that, a containment charm in Nocturne Alley inverted and turned a minor cursed object into a public hazard. He looked at Harry. "And this morning the press got a story they should not have gotten." Harry didn't flinch. "So what are you doing?" Kingsley's eyes hardened. "Emergency measures." A witch across the table slid a parchment forward, the ink still fresh. Harry didn't need to read it to feel Hermione's anger spike. Hermione snatched it up anyway. Her eyes moved fast. "Spell licensing," she snapped. "Registration checkpoints. Curfews. You're going to police basic magic." A man with a trimmed beard, department head, maybe, leaned forward. "We're going to prevent children from accidentally turning kitchens into battlegrounds." Hermione threw the parchment down. "You're going to make people panic more." Ron added, grim, "and panic is exactly what's feeding this." Kingsley's expression flickered, pain and agreement and the kind of responsibility that didn't allow either to matter. "If we do nothing, we lose the statute and the country with it." Harry felt the words land like a heavy door closing. Lose the statute. Expose magic. Collapse. He could feel the blessing purr at the thought. The cloaked figures shifted. The one who'd spoken earlier said, "The wardens are ready to assist in enforcement." Hermione's eyes narrowed. Wardens. So that was what they called themselves. The wardens of rule. People who believed the only cure for instability was stricter control. People who looked at chaos and saw a justification for power. Harry felt sick. Kingsley sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This isn't a debate. It's triage. We're implementing restrictions temporarily." "Temporarily," Hermione repeated, voice sharp with disbelief. "That's what governments always say when they want to expand authority." The room's temperature seemed to shift. Not physically. Magically. Harry felt the tremor increase. Wards tightening. Instruments somewhere in the walls ticking faster. The blessing inside him brightened with quiet delight. Discord. Hermione and Kingsley were both right, and that fact was gasoline. Harry stepped forward, forcing his voice flat. Stop. Everyone looked at him. Harry didn't raise his wand. He didn't posture. He just held their attention and tried to hold his own body steady. This is what it wants, Harry said quietly. You arguing. You contradicting each other. You making rules. People will hate and then responding to that hate with more rules. His throat tightened. It's a machine that runs on conflict. The bearded man scoffed. So what do you propose, Potter? We sing lullabies at the wards until they behave. Hermione's gaze snapped to him, warning. Harry felt the temptation, to answer sharply, to bite back, to create the kind of argument that felt satisfying for 1 second. The blessing nudged him toward it like a warm hand on his spine. Harry inhaled, slow and deliberate. One rule. One boundary. I propose you stop making 10 decisions at once, Harry said. You need one plan. One voice. No overlap. No panic-driven layers. Kingsley's eyes locked on Harry. And you think we can do that with the press outside and people already forming factions? Harry's gaze flicked toward the wardens. No. But you can stop making it worse. For a heartbeat, something like understanding moved through the room. Then a bang echoed outside, distant but sharp. An Auror burst through the door without knocking, face pale. Minister. There's a disturbance in the atrium. Protesters, wardens engaged, someone cast and. Kingsley was already moving. Contain it. Hermione swore and grabbed her wand. Ron's jaw clenched. Harry felt the air tighten again. The blessing inside him woke fully, warmth surging like a tide. They spilled into the corridor and moved fast toward the atrium. As they approached, the noise grew louder, shouting, spells snapping like whips, people screaming for calm and people screaming that calm was a lie. When they rounded the corner, the atrium was chaos made visible. A crowd had gathered beneath the golden statues, half angry, half terrified, all on the edge of something. Some carried signs, no wand registry. Don't blame Potter. Control saves US. Freedom is magic. In the middle, a line of Aurors held a barrier, trying to keep space between protesters and the reporters pressing for angles. And between the Aurors and the crowd stood the wardens, gray cloaks. Wands out, eyes hard. They weren't keeping the peace. They were holding the line like this was a war they'd been waiting for. A young wizard shouted, "You can't register my magic. It's mine." A warden snapped back, "Your magic is everyone's problem now." Someone threw a hex. Someone shouted, "Protega." Spells collided. A red jet hit the barrier and refracted sideways, striking the fountain. The fountain's enchanted water surged up in a twisting column and then froze mid-air into jagged crystalline blades. A woman screamed as shards rained down. Harry's heart slammed against his ribs. The blessing inside him flared, warm, eager, almost joyful. Hermione grabbed Harry's arm, voice frantic. "Don't cast. If you cast, it'll." A warden saw Harry and pointed. There. The line of gray cloaks shifted like a pack scenting prey. A man barked, "That's him." The source. Harry felt a sick twist in his gut. Not because he feared them. Because the moment they pointed. The crowd split, some turning toward him in anger, others in defense, others in awe. Factions crystallizing in real time. Discord becoming structure. And magic, hungry magic, responded. The barrier between Aurors and crowd shivered. Not from impact, but from contradiction, too many people shouting different commands at reality. The barrier's runes flickered. Harry felt the seam he'd felt the seam in the ministry chamber. He didn't want to notice it. But noticing was automatic now, like blinking. And when he noticed, the seam widened. The barrier sagged like wet cloth. An Auror shouted, "Reinforce." Another shouted, "Finite." A third shouted, "Hold, no, drop it, wheel." Overlapping intent. Overlapping orders. The barrier snapped into a different shape, instead of separating crowd and Aurors. It curved inward, forming a partial dome that trapped a dozen people inside, including a mother with a child, 2 reporters, and 3 wardens. The trapped group screamed. The crowd surged. Kingsley's voice cut through, furious. "Stop casting. Stop." No one listened. Panic is louder than authority. Harry's chest tightened. He saw it happening like a chain reaction. Each attempt to control it multiplied the contradictions, and the contradictions fed the bias, and the bias chose the outcomes that would worsen fear. The fountain's frozen shards spun and the air like knives caught in invisible hands. A child inside the dome began to cry. And then the dome, reacting to the cry, the fear, the crowd's fury, started to tighten. Hermione's face went white. It's going to compress. Ron snarled, move. Harry moved before thought. Not because he wanted to be heroic. Because he couldn't watch people die in front of him again. He lifted his wand, precise movement. Full focus, and aimed not at the crowd, not at the wardens, not at the Aurors. At the idea holding the dome together. A boundary that had forgotten what it was for. Harry breathed in, steady. One rule. One boundary. The dome protects. It does not crush. He cast Protega Terminis. A boundary shield spell, old and strict, designed to define the limits of a ward rather than strengthen it. Hermione had shown it to him once in a theory book. Harry had never used it in a real crisis. The air snapped. A clean line of shimmering force slid into place like a blade, slicing through the warped dome's logic, and rewriting its shape. The dome shuddered, fighting. For a heartbeat, Harry felt the blessing push back, warm and amused, like a god whispering, let it happen. Let it break. Harry held his intent like iron. The dome loosened, not collapsing, but opening, a controlled gap forming at the base. Kingsley immediately seized it. Evacuate. Now. Aurors pulled people out. The mother stumbled free, clutching her child. The reporters scrambled, quills shaking. Even a warden was dragged out, eyes wide with shock. The crowd roared, some in relief, some in outrage. Some chanting Harry's name like a prayer and a curse at the same time. Harry lowered his wand, chest heaving. Hermione grabbed his shoulders, eyes wild. Harry, are you all right? Harry tried to answer. Then he felt it. A distant snap. Not in the atrium. Elsewhere. A ward line, thin, stretched, already strained by fear and politics, had just been tugged too hard. Harry's stomach dropped. He turned his head slowly. As if he could look through stone and distance. What? Ron demanded. What is it? Harry's voice came out hoarse. Something broke. Hermione's face tightened. Where? Harry didn't know how he knew. He just knew. The blessing inside him pulsed like a heartbeat. And far away, beyond the ministry and Diagon Alley, beyond the shouting and the spells and the marble. The statute of secrecy had a seam. A seam that had been thinning for weeks. A seam that had just been pulled. In the chaos of saving people in the atrium, the world had chosen a trade. Less disaster here, for more disaster elsewhere. A second Auror ran up to Kingsley, face drained of color. Minister, Kent. The ward line. It failed fully. Muggles saw. There were lights, things moving, someone recorded. Kingsley's expression turned to stone. Hermione's hand flew to her mouth. Ron stared at Harry, eyes widening with dread. You mean? Harry's scar warmed, faint and pleased. Not pain. Approval. Like a god rewarding a move on a board. Harry swallowed hard, and the taste in his mouth was ash. Because he'd saved people here. And the world had paid for it elsewhere. The first Muggle. Video hit the internet before the ministry could even agree on what to call it. Harry watched it in a small, warded office deep inside magical law enforcement, where the air smelled like stress and ink and the kind of desperation people tried to hide behind procedure. It was shaky, grainy footage, someone's phone pointed at the sky over a quiet Kent village. Streetlights flickered. A pale shimmer danced along hedgerows like heat haze. Except it moved with intention. For 2 seconds, the outline of something impossible appeared above the trees. A curve of light like a doorway, a ripple like a hand pressing against glass. Then a child's voice, Muggle, young, said, Mum, what is that? The video cut off as someone swore. Hermione had both hands on the desk, knuckles white. Ron paced like a trapped animal. Kingsley stood by the window, staring out at nothing. An Auror muttered, it's already been reposted thousands of times. Harry felt the ministry's wards trembling under his skin like strained muscle. Every second the video stayed up, the statute grew thinner, not because Muggles suddenly believed, but because attention was a kind of pressure. Pressure created arguments. Arguments created contradictions. Contradictions fed the bias. The blessing inside Harry warmed faintly, pleased with the world's new fracture. Harry clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. Kingsley spoke without turning. We've deployed obliviators. We're flooding the area with cover stories, gas leak, drone incident, light pollution. But the footage is sticky. Hermione's voice was sharp. Sticky. Kingsley turned, face grim. The memory charms aren't holding cleanly. People are remembering around them. Like the charm deletes the details but leaves the feeling, fear, certainty, suspicion. Hermione's breath caught. The spell contract is slipping. Harry swallowed. So you can't patch it. Kingsley's eyes pinned him. We can. But every patch costs more. And the more we cast, the more. The more it feeds, Ron snapped. Finally stopping his pacing. Yeah, we get it. There was a beat of silence where all three of them avoided looking directly at Harry. Because no one wanted to say the obvious thing out loud. This was happening through him, even when he wasn't there. Kingsley rubbed a hand over his face. We're not here to blame you. We're here to stop this country from collapsing. Hermione's voice went cold. Then stop letting vigilantes swing wands at protesters. Kingsley's gaze sharpened. They're not being given authority. They're being tolerated temporarily, Becca. Yous were outnumbered and the streets are unstable. Temporarily, Hermione repeated again, like the word had become poison. Ron muttered, everything's temporary until it's forever. Harry stared at the paused Muggle video. The shimmering doorway frame looked like a wound in the sky. A knock came at the door. An Auror stepped in, face tight. Minister, there's been an incident in Nocturne Alley. Not the usual. Kingsley's posture changed instantly. Details. The Auror swallowed. 2 bodies. No obvious curse signature. But the scene, he hesitated, eyes flicking to Harry as if saying it in front of him might make it worse. The scene doesn't make sense. Hermione's voice was razor. Take us. Kingsley hesitated, one fraction of a second. Harry felt it, the calculation of risk, he fear of bringing the epicenter near another unstable site. Harry met his eyes. If you don't, someone else dies. Kingsley didn't argue. He just nodded once. Move. Nocturne Alley had always felt like it was made from bad choices. Even in daylight it clung to shadow. Even with Aurors present it smelled like old curses and desperation, like the stone itself had absorbed too many bargains. They arrived to find the narrow alley sealed with ward tape, ministry enchantments that buzzed faintly like angry bees. Aurors stood in a ring, faces grim, wands ready. Harry stepped past the tape and immediately felt it. A wrongness in the air that wasn't just the blessing's drift. This was deliberate. Someone had cast here with intention. But the intention didn't feel like a normal curse. It felt like a joke. A cruel one. The bodies lay near the mouth of a side passage. 2 adult wizards, both dressed in dark, practical robes. Not Aurors. Not civilians either. The kind of men who did business in alleys. Their faces were frozen in expressions Harry couldn't name. Not fear. Not pain. Surprise, like they'd been caught mid-thought. Between them sat a small object on the ground, a simple brass coin. Ron frowned. That it? A coin. Hermione crouched, eyes scanning. No scorch marks. No blood. No visible curse residue. Harry's scar warmed faintly, like the air had recognized him. He didn't crouch. He didn't touch anything. He just looked. And because he could see magic now, the scene unfolded in structures and tension lines. He saw a spell pattern in the air like invisible thread, fine and intricate. But frayed at the edges, as if the caster didn't care if it held perfectly. He saw 2 conflicting wards woven into the coin, one that promised fortune and one that promised loss. Contradiction. Encoded. A Trojan inside a trinket. Hermione whispered, it's like the curse doesn't pick one outcome. Ron's voice went tight. So it picks both. Harry swallowed. It picks the one that causes the most conflict. Kingsley stepped closer, gaze hard. Explain. Harry's eyes stayed on the coin. That coin is a trigger. It offers a choice, take it or leave. But either choice twists into a consequence that creates panic. If they take it, maybe their luck spikes and then collapses. If they leave it, something else goes wrong. It's not about killing them. It's about, he exhaled, making the world unstable. Hermione's voice was quiet with horror. A chaos hex. Kingsley's jaw tightened. We've seen hexes like this before. Hermione's eyes snapped to him. No, we haven't. Kingsley didn't argue. His silence was confirmation of something he didn't want to admit. The ministry didn't have a category for this yet. An Auror shifted uneasily. Minister, we tried finite. It Did nothing. We tried a counter-curse. The counter-curse mutated and, he swallowed, made the coin replicate for a second. Ron swore. Brilliant. Hermione looked up sharply. Replicate. The Auror nodded. Just for a moment. There were 3. Then they snapped back into 1. Hermione's face went pale. It's treating attempts to fix it as part of the spell's play. Harry felt the blessing inside him stir, warm and amused, like a god watching mortals stumble through a rigged puzzle. He forced himself to breathe slowly. 1 rule. 1 boundary. He didn't want to steer chaos. But he could feel the pressure building in this alley, the Aurors, fear, the Ministry's panic, the very existence of a new kind of curse that made old law feel useless. This place was becoming an argument. And the argument was feeding something. Harry lifted his wand, carefully. Hermione started to object, but he shook his head once, small, firm. I'm not breaking it, Harry said quietly. I'm isolating it. He aimed at the coin, not at the curse itself, but at the space around it. Protega terminis. A thin, shimmering boundary formed in a tight ring around the coin, clean and minimal. Like a circle drawn in air. The barrier didn't press inward. It simply defined, here and no farther. For a moment, the coin vibrated. Harry felt the curse push at the boundary as if testing it. Warmth surged inside him, tempting him to fight, to add more spells, to layer and overlap. That would make it worse. Harry held one thought only. This is a line. The vibration eased. The coin sat still. Hermione's breath released in a shaky exhale. You contained it. Ron stared at Harry. Mate, you're becoming the world's scariest tape measure. Harry didn't smile. Because he could feel what it cost. The containment didn't feel like victory. It felt like moving pressure from one place to another. Somewhere, something else would twitch. Collateral. Always collateral. Kingsley nodded sharply at the Aurors. Get a sealing box. Now. No one casts near it unless I say so. An Auror hurried off. Hermione stood, face tight. Who's doing this? Kingsley's gaze flicked to the bodies. We have suspects. Groups forming in the shadows. People who've realized instability is a weapon. Ron's eyes narrowed. Like the freehands guy. Hermione's voice was low. Not just them. Someone more, deliberate. Harry's scar warmed again. A whisper brushed the edge of his mind. Not words this time, but an impression. Good. The game begins. Harry swayed slightly, grip tightening on his wand. Hermione saw it instantly. Harry. He blinked, forcing focus. I'm fine. He wasn't. Because now the visions weren't just flickers and shields. They were pressing closer, lick. A door cracking open in the back of his skull. They left Nocturne Alley with the coin sealed in a humming containment box that made even Aurors flinch. The bodies were taken. The alley remained, shadow and rotten secrets. Back on a safer street, Ron pulled Harry and Hermione aside while Kingsley spoke to his Aurors. Ron's voice was harsh, urgent. I went to the burrow this morning. Mum had letters. Hermione blinked. Letters. Quote. Ron nodded. Not ordinary post. They didn't come by owl. They appeared on the kitchen table, like someone apparated paper. Hermione's eyes widened. That's impossible, Ron finished. Yeah, the letters were addressed to people we know. People who fought in the war. People who are tired, angry, scared. Harry's stomach tightened. What did they say? Ron swallowed, as if the words tasted bad. They said, there's a new way. That the old world's rules failed. That the Ministry will cage magic to protect it. And that anyone who wants freedom should, he clenched his jaw, should come to a meeting. Hermione's voice sharpened. Freehands recruitment. Ron shook his head. Not exactly. These weren't freehands. Why? They were religious. Harry felt a cold crawl up his spine. Ron met Harry's eyes. They mentioned an apple. Hermione went still. Ron's voice dropped. They called it the golden seed. Said it was planted in the world through a hero, and now it's sprouting. They said the sprouting will tear down false laws and false order. Hermione's mouth was tight. The Apple Eaters. Harry didn't know how he knew the name, but it surfaced in his mind like it had been waiting there. A cult. People who would worship the chaos's revelation. People who would look at the end of the world and call it truth. Ron continued, jaw clenched. They also said something else. Harry's throat felt too small. What? Ron's voice shook with anger. They said the hero is the horse. That he carries the gift inside him, and when it opens fully, the world will be remade. Quote. Hermione's face went pale. Trojan horse. Harry stared at Ron like the words had punched through his ribs. Because that wasn't just metaphor. That was a blueprint. That was someone out there understanding the mechanism well enough to recruit around it. Hermione whispered, "This is organized." Ron nodded. "And people are listening." Harry's scar warmed like approval. He closed his eyes briefly, forcing breath. One rule. One boundary. But the warmth didn't fade. It spread. And then the vision hit. Not a flicker. Not an accidental reflection. A full, immersive shift, as if someone had grabbed Harry's consciousness and yanked it sideways. The street vanished. Harry stood in a vast hall of stone columns under a sky too gold to be real. The air smelled of sun and iron and something ancient. Before him stretched a board, enormous, carved into marble. Not chess exactly. Not drafts. Something older. Pieces shaped like cities. Like towers. Like wands. Like a tiny carved horse. Around the board stood silhouettes, tall, luminous, their faces shifting like masks in firelight. They weren't fully seen. They didn't need to be. Tension pressed down on Harry like weight. A hand, beautiful and cruel, moved a piece. A city-toppling gesture made with lazy confidence. Harry heard laughter, deep and delighted, rolling like thunder. And a voice, close now, intimate as breath, whispered into his mind. "You wanted peace, little Victor. So I gave you a gift that cannot live in peace." Harry's chest tightened. He tried to speak. He tried to reach for Hermione or Ron or anything real. But the voice continued, amused. "Watch how easily laws become weapons. Watch how quickly love becomes faction. Watch how a world breaks itself, so no one can blame me." Harry saw the board, saw the carved horse, saw the pieces shifting not by force, but by argument. By fear. By pride. Then the hand paused over the horse piece. Hovering. As if waiting for the moment it would open. Soon, the voice whispered, almost tender. And Harry felt the warmth in his veins flare like a smile. He jerked back into reality with a sharp gasp. Hermione had both hands on his shoulders. Ron stood close, face tight with fear. "Harry." Hermione snapped. "Where did you go?" Harry's vision swam. The street felt too small. The sky felt too low. He swallowed hard, voice hoarse. "I saw them." Ron's face tightened. "Them who?" Harry's scar was warm, almost comfortable. He hated himself for that. He looked at Hermione, at Ron, at the ordinary street around them. And felt the terrible truth settle into his bones. This wasn't just a curse or a weapon. It was a game, and the wizarding world had just become the board. They didn't go back to Grimmauld Place. Hermione said it was compromised the moment the word apple started appearing in letters that didn't travel by owl. Ron wanted the burrow because it was home, because Molly would feed them until they stopped looking like ghosts. Harry wanted nowhere, because everywhere felt like a room with too many clocks. In the end, they went to the only place Hermione trusted more than locks. Books. Not the Hogwarts library, too public now, too many eyes. Hermione pulled strings with a contact at Flourish and Blots, then dragged them through a back corridor into a storage room full of dusty crates and old inventory. There, under a single floating lantern, Hermione spread parchment, texts, and rubbing paper copies like she was building a fortress out of paper and stubbornness. Ron sat on a crate, arms folded, jaw clenched. Harry stood near the door, because he couldn't stop feeling for tremors in the air, tiny slippages in the shop's wards, minor enchantments shifting as if they'd developed opinions. Hermione flipped open a cracked book bound in faded leather. "This," she said, tapping a page, "is a translated fragment from an older compilation of Greek magical references. Most of it is dismissed as myth by modern scholars because it mixes ritual with story." Ron snorted. "As opposed to our lives, which are purely sensible." Hermione shot him a look that asked for patience and then kept reading. "Golden apple," she murmured, eyes scanning. "A catalyst. A provocation. A gift that is not a gift." Harry's scar warmed. Hermione went still. "Harry," she said quietly. Harry swallowed. "Yeah." She didn't stop reading. She just spoke with that careful calm she used when she was terrified and refused to allow it to be the loudest thing in the room. "It's not Zeus," Hermione said. "Not Athena. Not Apollo. It's not a blessing, in the heroic sense. Ron leaned forward, frowning. Then what is it? Hermione's eyes lifted, sharp and pale in the lantern light. It's Eris. Harry felt the name like a stone dropped into water, ripples spreading through his ribs. Eris, Hermione repeated, as if saying it clearly would keep it from growing teeth. Goddess of strife, discord, the golden apple that sparked the Trojan War, the one inscribed with, to the fairest. Ron's expression twisted. So the Trojan horse thing isn't just poetic. Hermione shook her head, almost angry at the world for being this consistent. Its design, its theme turned into mechanism. Harry stared at the lantern. Its light flickered once, faintly, like it had heard the name and wanted to participate. Hermione slid another page toward them, her own notes, dense with diagrams. Lines connecting words like discord to variance to bias. A small drawing of a horse in the margin. Crossed out and redrawn more carefully. This is why the magic isn't random, Hermione said. Eris doesn't create chaos like a storm. She creates chaos like an argument. A wedge. A choice that makes people split. Ron's voice was tight. And Harry is the wedge. Harry flinched. Hermione looked at him immediately, regret softening her expression. Not by choice. But yes. You're the delivery system. Harry's throat closed. A horse. Hermione's jaw clenched. A Trojan horse. A noble shape carrying something that wasn't invited. Ron's hands curled into fists. So what do we do? How do we, what, do we stab a god? Hermione's eyes flicked toward the shop door, as if expecting it to open and reveal the answer. We find out why she did it. And how it triggers. Harry swallowed. It triggers on discord. Hermione nodded. And it accelerates with public fear. With contradictory law. With factions. Ron spat the words like they tasted poisonous. So basically with the ministry being the ministry. Harry's scar warmed again, almost pleasantly. He closed his eyes, forcing his breathing slow, ritual constraint, the only leash he had. One rule. One boundary. But beneath his control, the warmth stayed. Like a hand resting on his spine. Hermione's voice softened. Harry, you said you saw a board. Pieces. A horse piece. Harry nodded, eyes still closed. They were watching. Not watching. Hermione corrected gently. Playing. Ron muttered, lovely. Hermione reached for another book. A modern one, ministry approved, dry as parchment dust. I also pulled everything I could on older cross-cultural magical artifacts. Greek relics were always treated as story objects. Symbol-driven. That matters. She tapped the page. Symbol-driven magic changes behavior based on interpretation. On what people believe it means. Which means, the more people talk about it, Ron said, understanding with a grimace, the stronger it gets. Hermione nodded sharply. Exactly. Harry opened his eyes. So now that cult's sending letters. The apple eaters, Hermione said, and her voice hardened. Yes. They're spreading belief. They're feeding the symbol. They're making the story real. Ron's face tightened. And the wardens are feeding it too, just from the other side. Hermione's expression flickered with frustration and fear. This is why Eris chose you, Harry. Harry went still. Hermione met his eyes. Because the wizarding world can't agree on what you are. Hero, weapon, threat, savior, liar, proof, everyone projects. Everyone argues. You're a perfect mirror for faction. Harry felt something in his chest twist, not quite anger and not quite grief. He'd spent his whole life being a symbol. Now the symbol was the bomb. A sharp crack echoed outside the storage room. All three of them froze. Harry felt it instantly, a ward twitching somewhere in the shop, a charm slipping into a variant expression. Voices rose beyond the door, shouting, hurried footsteps. Hermione grabbed her wand. Ron did too. Harry's scar warmed as if in anticipation. Then the door burst open. Not a customer. Not a shopkeeper. Kingsley Shacklebolt stepped in with 2 oars and, behind him, unspeakable Vance. Hermione's eyes narrowed instantly. How did you find us? Kingsley's voice was rough. We didn't. You were followed. Ron swore. Fantastic. Vance's gaze swept the room, books, notes, diagrams. It paused on the word Eris written in Hermione's careful hand. Vance didn't blink. You've named her. Hermione's voice was cold. We did your job for you, apparently. Kingsley looked tired enough to be human. We don't have time for this. There's been another breach. 2 more videos. A Muggle news channel is calling it, the Kent Light phenomenon. And, his eyes flicked to Harry. And the Department of Mysteries wants you back underground. Immediately. Harry's stomach tightened. To study me. To contain you, Vance said, blunt as a guillotine. Hermione stepped forward. He's not a thing you lock up. Vance's gaze sharpened. He is a vector of systemic destabilization. People are being injured. The statute is cracking. If he is the focal point, then he must be placed under full containment. Ron's wand lifted a fraction. Try it. Kingsley's voice snapped. No, not here. Harry's pulse hammered. He could feel the shop's wards trembling around them like glass under pressure. He could also feel the blessing, warm, eager, responding to the rising conflict like a heartbeat speeding up. Hermione looked at Kingsley. You said transparency. Kingsley's face tightened. This isn't politics, Hermione. It's exactly politics, Hermione shot back. And fear. And control. Which is exactly what this thing feeds on. Vance spoke calmly, almost bored. We are not feeding it. We are responding to a threat. Hermione's eyes flashed. Were you responding when you brought the fragment into the ministry knowing it reacted to Harry's name? Were you responding when you ran those tests and provoked arguments to see if it spiked? Vance didn't deny it. The silence was the denial's corpse. Harry's breath caught. You let it proceed. Vance's gaze moved to him. We observed it, yes. Harry took a step forward, voice low, dangerous. Observed. Vance's voice stayed level. To understand it before it destroyed us. You think you can fight a god with moral outrage? Hermione's voice was shaking now. You used him. Kingsley's jaw tightened. Enough. Vance. Vance cut him off with quiet authority. Minister, with respect. Your tolerance for symbolism is costing lives. Potter is not just a man right now. He is a moving fault line. Harry's scar warmed. Not pain. Recognition. A grin behind his ribs. Harry's hands trembled. He curled them into fists to keep them from shaking. Ron stepped closer to Harry, voice rough. You're not taking him. Vance's eyes were flat. We are. Hermione's voice rose, sharp. This is exactly how you lose people. You treat them like problems and then act surprised when they become one. Vance's mouth twitched by a fraction, almost amused. He is already a problem, Granger. He is just a moral one, too. Harry felt the room tighten. Not metaphorically. The lantern above them flickered. The shelves rattled faintly. Ink bottles on a nearby desk trembled like they wanted to leap. The shop's wards began to hum in a rising pitch. Hermione's eyes widened. Stop arguing, stop. Too late. The blessing inside Harry surged, warm as a wildfire, as if it had been waiting for tea. His exact moment. Authority versus defiance, control versus freedom, love versus fear. The Trojan payload stirred. Harry heard it, not with ears, but with bone-deep certainty. A wedge placed perfectly. Vance lifted their wand. Potter, you will come with us. Harry's voice came out hoarse. No. Vance's wand hand tightened. Then you will be compelled. Hermione shouted, don't you dare. Ron raised his wand fully. Try it and all. Discord. Harry felt the air snap. The shop's wards rippled outward like a skin shivering. The notice me not charm on the front door flickered, and for a heartbeat Harry could see straight through it to the Muggle street outside. A passing woman glanced toward the shop as if she'd heard something. Then looked away. Then looked back again, confused. The charm stuttered. Hermione's face went white. Harry, your proximity. Harry's scar blazed warm. And then the blessing did what it had been designed to do when the carrier was cornered. It unsealed a layer. Not the full opening. Not yet. But enough to make the world remember it could be different. The lantern exploded into harmless sparks, beautiful, glittering, drifting like fireflies. Every spark that hit the air became a tiny spell seed, mutating into small, chaotic enchantments. A book snapped shut and then opened to a random page, words rearranging themselves into insults. A crate's lock unlatched itself and then relocked backwards. A protective charm Hermione had placed over her notes inverted and tried to hide the notes from her. The shop itself shuddered like it was laughing. Kingsley cursed, loud and sharp. Everyone stop, no casting. But Vance was already moving, precise and controlled. Anchor wards. Seal this room. Vance flicked their wand in an elegant pattern, clean, ritual perfect. For a heartbeat, it worked. A ring of containment formed around Harry like a thin, glassy wall. Harry felt the boundary clamp down. He also felt the blessing press against it like something inside him stretching its wings. Not obeying. Negotiating. Harry's breath came fast. His vision blurred at the edges. Hermione grabbed his arm. Harry, look at me. Breathe. One rule, one boundary. I can't, Harry whispered. Because the containment ring wasn't just a spell. It was an argument. It was the ministry saying you are a thing to be contained, and Harry's IFE had been arguments like that since he was 11. The blessing latched onto the contradiction and pulled. The containment ring didn't break outward. It reinterpreted itself. Instead of containing Harry, it contained the room. The walls shimmered, and suddenly everyone inside the storage room felt the boundary, tight, claustrophobic, pressing inward like a crowd. Ron swore, eyes wide. What did you do? Harry didn't answer. He didn't know. He only felt the warmth inside him, delighted, approving, as if a god had clapped slowly. Kingsley's face tightened in real fear. Potter, drop it. Drop it now. Harry tried. He focused on one clean thought. Open. The boundary shuddered. Then, like the world choosing the option that created the most chaos, it didn't open. It shifted. The containment ring slid sideways, clipping through shelves and crates as if matter had become negotiable. For a moment, the room's geometry felt wrong, corners too sharp, distances too short. A stack of books toppled, but instead of falling, they drifted upward like balloons, pages fluttering like wings. Hermione shouted, Harry, stop thinking in concepts, think in actions. Harry squeezed his eyes shut, panic rising. The blessing loved panic. Harry could feel it. He could feel it laughing. He forced his breathing slow, grinding. One rule. One boundary. A boundary that didn't crush. A boundary that didn't twist. A boundary that did what boundaries were supposed to do. He opened his eyes and looked at Hermione, really looked. Anchored to her face, her presence, her certainty. Help me, Harry whispered. Hermione didn't hesitate. She stepped close, and instead of casting, she spoke, clear and firm like a law being written aloud. Harry Potter is not a weapon. The words hit the air like a stake. Ron immediately followed, voice raw. He's our friend. Kingsley, after a heartbeat of struggle, added quietly, he is a citizen. Even Vance, just for a fraction of a second, hesitated. And in that hesitation, the room's magic wavered. Consensus. Not a spell. A shared definition. Harry seized it like a rope. He pictured the boundary as a door, not a cage. He pictured it opening in one direction only, outward. Away from the Muggle street, away from witnesses, away from collateral. Release, Harry said, not as an incantation but as a decision. The shimmering ring loosened. The sparks dimmed. The floating books drifted back down, landing with soft thuds like exhausted birds. The shop's wards steadied, still strained, but no longer tearing. Silence fell hard, broken only by everyone's breathing. Harry's knees threatened to buckle. Hermione held him up without comment. Vance stared at Harry, the first real emotion cracking their calm, calculation laced with something like dread. Kingsley's face was pale. That, he said quietly, was an unsealing event. Hermione's voice shook with anger. And it happened because you tried to compel him. Vance's voice was still controlled. But sharper now. It happened because he is unstable. Harry's scar warmed faintly, like a smug agreement. Harry looked at Vance, chest tight. If you try to cage me again, he said hoarsely. It will happen again. Worse. Vance's eyes narrowed. Then you will learn control under our supervision. Harry's voice was flat. No. Kingsley stepped forward. Harry. Harry turned to him. Minister. If you're going to let them treat me like a bomb and then shake me to see what happens, I'm done cooperating. Kingsley's face tightened with exhaustion. You can't just walk away. Harry's laugh was bitter and small. Watch me. Hermione stepped beside him like a shield made of flesh and fury. Ron did the same. For a moment, they weren't three people in a storage room. They were a line, a decision. Harry felt the blessing hum in his veins, warm, attentive, as if curious what he'd do when he stopped being moved like a piece. Kingsley looked between them, jaw clenched. And in his eyes Harry saw the truth. Kingsley wasn't their enemy. He was just drowning. Where will you go? Kingsley asked, voice lower. Hermione answered without hesitation. Somewhere you can't turn into a laboratory. Vance's voice was cold. If you leave, you are choosing to endanger the entire country. Harry met Vance's gaze steadily, even though his hands still trembled. "No," Harry said. "If you keep treating me like a lever, you're choosing that." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Kingsley exhaled, slow, heavy. "I can't stop you," he said quietly. "Not without making it worse." Harry nodded once. "Then don't." They backed away, step by careful step, and left the storage room behind. The shopkeeper outside looked frightened and confused, as if he'd felt the wards twitch but didn't know why. Hermione guided Harry through the back corridor. Ron watched their rear like he expected wardens to drop from the ceiling. As they reached the alley exit, Harry felt City's magic like a nervous system, threads vibrating, wards tightening, people arguing in distant rooms. The world was already leaning toward fracture. And now, because Harry had refused the ministry. Because he'd been cornered and the blessing had tasted that pressure. The Trojan horse inside him was no longer sleeping. It was awake. And somewhere beyond the sky, beyond the world, he heard that amused thunder again, closer now. Intimate as breath, as if Eris had leaned forward at the board. As if she'd been waiting for Harry to finally step off the square she'd chosen. And start moving on his own. They ran. Not the heroic kind of running, no dramatic chases, no bold speeches in the rain. Just the quiet, miserable kind where you keep your head down and your wand ready, and you try not to think about how the world is cracking behind you. Hermione led them through side streets and back passages like she'd memorized the city's bones. Ron kept looking over his shoulder like he expected gray cloaks to appear in every shadow. Harry kept feeling the city's magic twitch in tiny places, streak charms slipping into odd variants, ward lines humming like strained wires. Every time someone nearby raised their voice, the air tightened. Every time someone argued, the blessing inside Harry warmed as if it had been fed. He hated how quickly his body learned to anticipate it. They ended up on the coast. Not because it was romantic. Because it was empty. Hermione had insisted. The fewer people, the fewer contradictions. The fewer arguments. Ron had muttered something about how the sea had never solved anything. But he'd gone anyway. Shell Cottage still stood, salt-streaked and stubborn, its wards layered with the careful love of people who'd learned what it meant to defend home. Bill opened the door with his wand half raised, then lowered it when he saw them. His face shifted, concern, relief, then the kind of frustration that meant he already knew the headline version of what was happening. "I wondered how long it'd take you to show up," Bill said, voice rough. Fleur appeared behind him, eyes narrowing. "You bring trouble, we." Hermione's shoulders sagged. Like she'd been holding the world upright for days. "We didn't have anywhere else." Bill stepped aside. "Then you do now." They stayed inside the cottage's warded warmth while the sea slammed its LF against rocks outside like it was trying to punch sense into the world. Harry sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug he didn't drink from. Hermione spread parchment and books again. Because it was the only way she knew to build safety. Ron stood by the window, watching the horizon like he expected the sky to crack open and spill gods. Bill watched them all for a minute, then spoke quietly. "Kingsley's in a panic. Not screaming panic. The other kind. The kind that writes laws at midnight." Hermione's jaw tightened. "He's making it worse." Bill grimaced. "He's trying not to lose the statute." Ron snorted. "He's losing people." Fleur leaned against the counter, arms folded. "And the strange magic. It is worse." Hermione nodded once. "It's learning." Harry flinched at the word. Because it was true. The blessing didn't feel like a static curse. It felt like a mind that noticed patterns. That remembered what made humans break. That grew warmer when it found the pressure points. Hermione pushed a parchment toward Harry. It was covered in her tight handwriting in circles around a few repeated phrases. Order. Consistency. Shared definition. Truth. "I've been thinking," Hermione said, voice low. Intense. "Not about fighting a god head on. That's," her mouth tightened, "not something we can do in the usual way." Ron muttered, "Usually we just set things on fire and hope." Hermione ignored him. "Eris isn't a storm. She's a wedge. Her magic is symbolic. It's interpretation-driven. The artifact is a story turned into mechanism." Bill frowned. "So you can't just break it?" "No," Hermione said. "Because breaking it is still engaging the story. It's still an argument. And arguments are her food." Harry stared at the parchment, feeling the warmth in his veins hum faintly. As if it liked being talked about like this. As if it was proud. Hermione took a breath. But stories can be countered by other stories. Not lies, structures. Rules people agree to. Ron's brow furrowed. You mean, law. Hermione's eyes flashed. Not ministry law. Not edicts. Those are contradictions stacked on fear. I mean something older. Something that predates the ministry's patchwork wards. Bill tilted his head. You're talking about pre-ministry magic. Hermione nodded sharply. Pre-Hogwarts, even. Old wardcraft, the kind that doesn't depend on secrecy and bureaucracy. The kind that anchors itself in consensus. Harry looked up slowly. Consensus. Hermione met his eyes. Shared intention. Shared definition. Magic stabilized by people agreeing on what is true. Ron's mouth twisted. You want people to agree. Hermione, have you met people? Hermione's laugh was sharp and humorless. That's why Eris is winning. Because we've built a world where we rely on secrecy and individual power and then act surprised when society fractures. Harry's scar warmed faintly. Approval. Amusement. Like the blessing, like the argument even when it was about stopping it. Harry pushed his mug away. Fingers tightening. So how do we do it? Hermione hesitated. I think, she swallowed. I think there's an old framework. A ritual structure. Not a spell. A kind of covenant casting. Bill's gaze sharpened. You've got a source. Hermione pulled out a battered notebook and flipped it open. When I was doing post-war research, I found a reference in a translate. D account of Roman British ward builders. They weren't wizards in the modern sense. More like magical engineers. They built boundary systems to keep hostile forces out, spirits, creatures, sometimes other humans. Ron leaned in. And Hermione tapped one line she'd underlined so hard the parchment was nearly torn. The concordant oath, truth shared becomes boundary. Harry felt something shift in his chest. Not warmth. Not the blessing. Something quieter. Hope, sharp enough to hurt. Hermione's voice grew urgent. If discord magic feeds on contradiction, then the opposite isn't control. It's alignment. Not tyranny. Agreement. Quote. Ron said slowly, so instead of stacking spells, you stack truths. Hermione nodded. Exactly. Bill exhaled. Where is this concordant oath? Hermione pointed to a rough map she'd drawn. Coastal routes, a point marked inland. Old ruins. Not famous. The site's ward imprint still exists. If it's real, the runes there might still hold the ritual geometry. Ron stared. So we're going to an ancient ruin to do a vow spell to fight a Greek goddess. Hermione's smile was thin. Yes. Fleur sighed dramatically. You English and your hobbies. They traveled at night. Not because it was safer, because fewer people were awake to argue about what they were seeing. They reached the ruins just before dawn, when the sky was a pale bruise and the air tasted like wet stone. It wasn't a grand temple. It was a broken circle of standing stones half swallowed by earth, tucked in a hollow where fog clung like cloth. Moss-covered old carvings. A Shaw. Low depression in the center suggested something had once been set there, an altar, a basin, a boundary marker. Hermione stepped into the ring and went very still. I can feel it, she whispered. Harry felt it too. Not like Hogwarts wards, proud and complex. Not like ministry wards, tight and patched. This was simple, old. A boundary that didn't care about politics. A line drawn by people WHO understood one brutal truth. If you can't agree on what you are defending, you can't defend anything. Ron's voice came out quiet, respectful despite himself. It's calm. Harry's scar prickled faintly as he stepped over the edge of the circle. The blessing reacted instantly. Not violently. Curiously. Like it had entered a room where the rules were different. Hermione traced the carvings. With her fingertips without touching too hard. These aren't just runes, she murmured. They're statements. Ron frowned. Runes can do that. Hermione nodded. In older systems, yes. They weren't just symbols. They were claims. You carve a truth into the world, and the world treats it as law. Harry felt the warmth in his veins pulse, unhappy now. Not fed. Not pleased. He could almost sense the blessing's irritation. Hermione turned to them, eyes bright with something fierce. We try it. Small scale. 3 people is the minimum for consensus geometry. Ron's mouth twisted. Of course it's 3. Hermione ignored him and stepped into the center, marking positions with stones like she was setting up a ritual the way she'd set up camp, methodically, stubbornly. Rules, Hermione said. We don't overlap. We don't contradict. We pick one shared definition and hold it. Ron rubbed his palms on his trousers. What definition? Hermione looked at Harry. Harry's stomach tightened. Me. Hermione nodded. If Eris is feeding on what you represent, then we define you. Harry's throat went dry. I don't. Harry, Hermione cut in, gentle but iron. You don't get to let the world define you anymore. Ron stepped closer, voice rough. She's right. Harry swallowed. The fog curled through the stones like it was listening. Hermione took a slow breath. Say it out loud. Not as a spell, as truth. Harry felt the blessing stir, warm and warning, like an animal noticing a trap. He forced himself to breathe slow. One rule. One boundary. But this time, the boundary wasn't a shield. It was a statement. Hermione spoke first, voice clear. Harry Potter is not a weapon. The air didn't crackle. It settled, like dust falling. Ron followed, jaw clenched as if the words were a vow he'd bleed for. Harry Potter is our friend. Harry's chest tightened. He could feel the old stones respond, not with power, but with acceptance. Like they were built to recognize shared meaning. Now it was his turn. The blessing inside him surged, trying to push something else forward, something sharper, more divisive, more likely to create argument. Harry ignored it. He spoke from the place that had survived everything. I am not your war, Harry said quietly. Then, louder, steadier, I am not a weapon. I am a person. The ring of stones hummed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the air inside the circle clarified, like someone had wiped fog off a window and suddenly you could see the world properly. Harry felt it in his bones. For the first time in weeks, the magic around him stopped twitching. The blessing inside him didn't vanish, but it quieted. Hermione's eyes widened. Do you feel that? Ron breathed, blimey. Harry swallowed hard. It's less. Hermione's voice was tight with awe. The variance dampened. The bias, she closed her eyes briefly, concentrating. It's still there, but it's not grabbing everything it can. Ron looked around the ring. So this place is like a stabilizer. Hermione nodded. Because it's built on agreement. It forces magic to obey the simplest contract. Shared truth becomes boundary. Harry's scar prickled faintly, not pain. Resistance. The blessing didn't like this. Harry felt it, suddenly, like a second heartbeat trying to speed up again. And with that awareness came something else, something he hadn't noticed before. A new sense. Not just seeing wards and seams. Seeing lies. Harry turned his head slowly, and his gaze landed on a carved rune at the edge of the circle. It looked worn, cracked, half moss-covered, but to Harry's new sight, it wasn't just cracked, it was contradictory. The rune claimed one thing and was patched by a later carving that claimed another. Two truths forced into the same space. Harry stepped toward it, breath shallow. This one's wrong. Hermione blinked. What? Harry pointed. That rune was altered. It's disagreeing with itself. Hermione rushed over, studying it. Ron leaned in. Hermione's eyes widened. You're right. It's been modified. Someone tried to improve it by adding a secondary clause. She looked up sharply. Harry, you didn't see that yesterday. Not like this. Harry swallowed. I can feel the contradiction. Like static. Hermione's voice went very quiet. That's huge. Ron frowned. Why? Hermione looked between them, understanding hitting like lightning. Because if Harry can sense contradiction, then the blessing can be used against itself. Harry's stomach tightened. Used. Hermione nodded, fierce. Not to cast more chaos. To detect the seams. The places where law is patched with hypocrisy. Where wards are contradictory. Where the ministry's plans conflict with themselves. Where people are lying. Ron grimaced. Careful with that last one. Hermione didn't smile. Eris is using contradiction as fuel. So we starve her by reducing contradiction, and we target the places she's already weakened. Harry stared at the altered rune. He felt the blessing inside him stir again, unhappy, wary, like it knew Hermione had just found the knife edge. Harry whispered, so, we rebuild the rules. Hermione nodded. Not with fear, with consent. Ron exhaled sharply. You're talking about rewriting the whole bloody system. Hermione's expression didn't waver. Yes. Harry felt the old stones humming around them, calm and ancient. And he realized what made the thought terrifying. Eris wasn't just trying to break spells. She was trying to prove something. That wizarding society's order was never real. That it was always patchwork. Always hypocrisy, always one panic away from tyranny or collapse. Hermione looked at Harry, voice steady. If we want to stop the Trojan from opening fully, we need a bigger circle. Bigger consensus. Not 3 people in ruins. A community. Ron's jaw tightened. Good luck getting the wardens and the freehands to agree on what day it is. Harry looked down at his hands. He felt the dampened warmth inside him, still there, still dangerous, but held in check by the circle's clarity. A thought surfaced, sharp and clean. The opposite of strife isn't silence. It's shared truth. He lifted his head. We don't need them to like each other, Harry said quietly. We need them to agree on one thing. Hermione's eyes locked on his. Which thing? Harry's voice turned steady, like a boundary being drawn. That magic doesn't get to own people. Ron swallowed. Hermione nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting for him to say it. Then the air outside the circle trembled. Not a gentle hum like the stones. A harsh vibration, like a ward tearing. Harry's scar warmed sharply. Hermione's head snapped up. That wasn't us. Ron's wand was already in his hand. Company. A Patronus burst through the fog like a silver comet and slammed into the edge of the stone ring, light splashing across moss and runes. Kingsley's voice came from it, urgent and raw. Harry, Hermione, Ron. It's happening. The atrium. Now. We've got a full-scale breach and the factions are tearing each other apart. Whatever this thing is, it's opening. The Patronus dissolved into mist. Silence returned, but it wasn't calm. It was the kind of silence right before a building collapses. Hermione met Harry's eyes. Chapter 10, she whispered, almost like a prayer and a warning. Ron's face tightened. So we go to the place with the most people and the most arguments. Harry felt the blessing inside him flare faintly, excited at the thought. He hated that. He stepped out of the circle. And immediately the world felt louder, magic twitching, air tense, the faint hum of discord returning like an itch. But he didn't flinch this time. He'd felt what order could be. Not control. Not cages. A shared line drawn together. Harry lifted his wand, not like a weapon. Like a tool. Then we bring the circle with us, Harry said, voice low and steady. We make them agree, just once. Long enough to break the apple. Hermione nodded. Ron swallowed and nodded too. And as they apparated into the gray morning, Harry heard distant thunder laughter roll across the edge of his mind, closer now, hungry. As if Eris had seen their plan. And couldn't wait to argue with it. They apparated into the ministry like a knife sliding into a wound. Harry barely had time to steady his feet before the noise hit him, shouting. Spellfire, the roar of a building full of people trying to decide what reality was allowed to be. The atrium had become a battleground. Not armies. Beliefs. The fountain at the center, once a symbol of unity, was half frozen, half boiling, water suspended in midair as if it couldn't decide whether to flow or shatter. The golden statues around it had warped slightly. Faces stretched into expressions that weren't carved by any sculptor. Not anger. Not grief. Something closer to argument. Aurors held the perimeter, but their barrier spells flickered and stuttered under the pressure of too many voices and too many contradictory commands. Reporters were still there, of course, protected behind a trembling shield, quills moving like frantic insects. And the factions, Merlin, the factions. To the left, wardens of rule in their gray cloaks, wands out, eyes cold with certainty, shouting orders like laws were weapons. To the right, freehands, some wandless. Some clutching wands like defiance, faces bright with rage and hope, chanting about freedom and the end of cages. Between them, everyone else. Citizens caught in the crossfire of ideology, terrified, furious. Desperate to find someone to blame. Harry felt it all like heat. He felt every contradiction like a hook under his skin. And inside him, the blessing surged. Not subtly anymore. It rose. Through his veins like wildfire racing up dry wood, warm and thrilled and hungry. Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve the moment they arrived. Don't look at all of it, she hissed. Pick one thing. One truth. Ron's jaw was set like stone. Kingsley. Kingsley was near the fountain, barking orders into the chaos, trying to force a single plan through 100 clashing plans. He looked up and spoke. TTED them, and for a moment his face cracked with relief so raw it hurt. Then a scream cut through the air. A barrier spell snapped sideways, not breaking but reinterpreting itself, and suddenly a session of the atrium floor became slick as ice, people slipping, falling, screaming as wands misfired on impact. A warden shouted, "Contain them." A freehand shouted, "No, let them go." An orer shouted, "Stop, stand down." Overlapping orders. Overlapping intent. The air tightened like a noose. Harry felt the seam. Not one seam. Dozens. All across the atrium, tiny weak points where wards were patched onto panic. Where rules contradicted themselves, where fear had been written into magic like a signature. And the blessing inside him smiled. The Trojan horse shuddered. Harry heard it leak. A door creaking open in the back of his skull. Not a vision. Not a flicker. A presence. A laugh, soft as silk and loud as thunder, rolled through his mind. Ah, the city of rules. Harry's scar warmed like a brand. Hermione's voice snapped through the fog in his head. "Harry, here, look at me." Harry forced his gaze to her face. One anchor. One boundary. Her eyes were fierce and terrified and real. Ron stepped in close, shoulder pressing Harry's like a shield made of stubbornness. "We do it now," Ron growled. "Before this place tears itself apart." Harry swallowed, throat raw. "We need a circle." Hermione nodded sharply. "We make one." "How?" Ron demanded. "With all this." Hermione's gaze flicked to the center of the atrium, the fountain, the statues, the space where everyone's attention kept snapping back like a magnet. "Right there," Hermione said. "Where the argument is loudest. Because if the blessing fed on discord, then the only place to starve it, truly starve it, was where it was currently feasting." Harry took a step forward. The crowd noticed instantly. Like the room had been waiting for him to move. A ripple went through the factions. "Potter!" Someone shouted, half accusation, half prayer. "He's here. It's him, he's the reason. He saved people. He's breaking everything." The noise surged. The blessing surged with it. Warmth climbed Harry's spine, delighted. Hermione grabbed his hand. "No wand, no spell. Just skin on skin." "Harry," she said, voice low and razor steady, "we don't fight her with power. We fight her with definition." Harry nodded once, jaw clenched. They pushed through the chaos toward the fountain. Aurors tried to clear space, but every time they shouted, someone shouted back. Every time a barrier went up, it warped. Kingsley fought his way to them. Eyes wild. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Hermione didn't flinch. "Ending this." Kingsley stared at Harry. "Harry, if you cast here." "I won't cast like that," Harry said hoarsely. Ron spat. "Let him talk, Kingsley." Kingsley's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop them. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe, in his heart, he knew that control was exactly what was failing. Hermione stepped onto the lip of the fountain, water suspended around her like a frozen question, and raised her voice. Not a spell. A statement. "Stop." Her voice cracked through the atrium like a bell. People turned out of reflex. Hermione's eyes flashed. "If you cast one more spell right now, you will hurt someone you didn't mean to hurt. If you shout one more order that contradicts someone else's order, you will make the magic worse. That's not theory, look around you." For a heartbeat, the crowd hesitated. Not because they trusted Hermione. Because the evidence was hanging in the air, frozen water, warped wards. Misfires snapping sideways. Hermione pointed directly at the wardens. "You are not saving anyone by forcing control through fear." Then she pointed at the freehands. "And you are not saving anyone by worshipping instability as freedom." The room trembled, anger rising, ready to explode. Harry stepped forward and spoke, voice low but carrying. "You're all feeding it." Silence wavered. The blessing inside him pressed, urging him to sharpen the words, to accuse, to trigger a fight. Harry ignored it. He held the one truth they'd found in the stones. Shared truth becomes boundary. Harry raised his voice. "This isn't about who's right," Harry said. "It's about what you agree is real." A warden barked, "We agree magic must be controlled." A freehand shouted, "We agree the ministry is a cage." Arguments flared instantly. The air tightened again. Harry felt the Trojan stir like a beast stretching its limbs. Hermione stepped closer to Harry, voice urgent, barely audible. "One thing. Make them agree on one thing. Harry's pulse hammered. He looked at the crowd, faces twisted in fear, pride, fury, hope. He looked at Kingsley, desperation wrapped in authority. He looked at the Aurors, tired hands clenching wands that didn't behave anymore. Then Harry did something he'd almost never done in his life. He told the truth without trying to make it sound brave. I don't know how to fix this alone, Harry said. I can't. And if you keep fighting each other, it will open fully, whatever is inside me, whatever this blessing is, it will open. And none of you will control what comes out. A murmur rippled, fear, disbelief, and something else. Recognition. Harry swallowed and pushed on, voice steadying. But I know one thing, he said. Magic doesn't get to own people. Not the Ministry's magic. Not wandless magic. Not old magic. Not God magic. If magic becomes something that controls us, we're done. The crowd shifted. Even the wardens hesitated. Even the freehands faltered. Because beneath all their arguments was one shared terror. Being helpless. Harry pointed at himself, not as a symbol, but as a warning. I am not your weapon, Harry said clearly. I am not your excuse. I am not your proof. I'm a person. And if you want to survive this, you have to agree on that, on the idea that people come first. A quiet voice, an older witch near the back, said softly, people come first. Another voice echoed, hesitant. People come first. A third voice, angry but unwilling to be the villain, snapped, fine. People come first. The words spread, not as perfect unity, but as a shared line drawn through the chaos. People come first. Harry felt the air shift. Not snapping, clarifying, like fog pulled away from glass. The fountain's suspended water trembled, then began to drip normally. A barrier spell nearby stopped warping and held still. The blessing inside Harry recoiled, irritated, hungry, like a flame deprived of oxygen. And then, she arrived, not in a flash of light, not with wings or thunderbolts, with laughter. The sound rolled through the atrium, not from one throat, but from the space between people. From the cracks in their agreements, from the bitter edges of every argument they'd ever had. The air above the fountain shimmered. A figure took shape, tall, beautiful in a way that made Harry's stomach twist. Her presence like a grin held too long. Her eyes weren't eyes. They were decisions. Every time you looked at her, you felt the urge to disagree with yourself. Some screamed. Some fell silent. Some lifted wands and then froze, suddenly unsure if casting was help or harm. Hermione's voice was a whisper, horrified. Eris. Eris smiled. Little hero, she purred, not with sound, but straight into Harry's mind. My lovely horse. Harry's scar burned warm, ecstatic. Harry clenched his teeth. Get out of my head. Eris laughed again, delighted. Oh, but you invited me. They all did. Every law stitched from fear. Every secret dressed as virtue. Every righteous little faction convinced it is the only truth. She drifted closer, not walking, but sliding through the argument in the room. I gave you a gift that grows in hypocrisy. And look, her gaze swept the atrium, drinking in the tension, it has grown beautifully. Hermione's voice shook with fury. You're using him. Eris tilted her head, almost affectionate. Yes. Ron's wand lifted a fraction. Wheel. Hermione snapped. Ron, no. Eris's smile widened, hungry. Say it. Threaten. Argue. Feed me. Ha. RRY felt the Trojan horse inside him creak, like doors loosening. He remembered the board, the carved horse piece, the waiting hand. Eris's gaze locked on him. Let it open, she whispered into Harry's mind. Be my champion. End their false laws. Break their cages. Let magic be wild again. Harry's hands trembled. Because part of him, some exhausted, wounded part, wanted it. Not because he loved chaos. Because he was tired of being controlled. Eris sensed it. She leaned close. I can give you peace, she murmured. Not harmony. Peace through ruin. No laws to fail you. No ministry to cage you. No expectations. No prophecy. Just power that answers only to you. Hermione's fingers tightened around Harry's hand like a lifeline. Ron's shoulder pressed against him, solid and human. Kingsley's voice came out hoarse, desperate. Harry, don't listen. Eris laughed. And what does the minister offer? More cages. More rules. More lies written into law. Harry swallowed hard. He could feel the blessing's mechanism now, like a lock built into his bones. like doors that would swing open if he stepped into the role she offered. But he could also feel the other thing. The ring of shared truth they'd sparked in the atrium. People come first. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't total unity. But it was enough to form a boundary. Harry lifted his head. No, Harry said quietly. Eris blinked, genuinely surprised. As if, no, was a new concept. Harry's voice strengthened. I won't be your champion, he said. And I won't be their weapon. Eris's smile turned sharp. Then choose. Open and rule the wreckage. Or resist and watch it tear them apart anyway. Hermione stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. There's a third way. Eris laughed, mocking. Humans love third ways. Hermione looked at the crowd. Say it again, she called, voice rising. People come first. The phrase echoed, uneven, but real. Harry felt the boundary strengthen. Ron's voice cut in, raw. People come first. Kingsley swallowed, then said it too, like it tasted like surrender and salvation at once. People come first. Eris's expression tightened, annoyance, hunger. Harry closed his eyes and reached inward. Not for more power. For the one thing the blessing had accidentally given him that could kill it. The ability to sense contradiction. Harry felt for the core of T. He Trojan, where the gift skin wrapped the strife payload. He found it. A knot of story logic. A blessing that was built to betray. A gift that could not survive honesty. Harry opened his eyes and spoke the most dangerous kind of magic in any world. A definition. This gift is a lie, Harry said clearly. And lies don't get to write our laws. Eris's laughter faltered. For the first time, her presence flickered, like a candle in wind. Because the Trojan could only live as long as it stayed disguised as a blessing, as long as it could keep being interpreted in contradictory ways, miracle and curse, freedom and threat. Harry raised his wand, but he didn't cast at Eris. He cast at the story. Hermione stepped beside him, wand raised, and Ron did too, not overlapping, not contradicting, but aligned in one shared intent. 3 points. A triangle. A minimal circle. Harry spoke, slow and deliberate, like carving runes into stone. Concordant oath. Hermione's voice joined, clear and fierce. Truth shared becomes boundary. Ron's voice followed, rough but unwavering. People come first. The air in the atrium clarified violently, like fog ripped away. Spells stopped warping mid-flight and simply fizzled. The fountain's water crashed down normally with a loud splash that sounded like reality exhaling. Eris's form trembled. She snarled, beautiful, furious. You think agreement can cage a god? Harry's scar burned, hot and pleading, urging him to fight harder, to argue, to hate. He didn't. He held the line. Not alone. Together. The crowd, hundreds of them, weren't perfectly united. But they weren't screaming now. They were watching, listening, holding the same sentence in their mouths like a prayer they didn't fully believe but wanted to. People come first. And that was enough. Eris's presence shuddered, pulled not by force, but by a lack of fuel. Her smile cracked. Clever horse, she hissed into Harry's mind. You learned to choose the stable outcome. Harry's voice was quiet. I learned to choose people. He pushed the final piece into place, not more power, but more clarity. By our shared will, Harry said, this ends. The Trojan mechanism inside him creaked, doors loosening. And then, instead of opening outward like a bomb, it split, not exploding, dividing, like a fruit cut cleanly in half. Harry felt something tear away from his chest, warmth, hunger. Delight, ripping out like a thorn being pulled from flesh. Pain flashed white behind his eyes. He stumbled. Hermione caught him. Ron held him up. Eris screamed, not in sound, but in disagreement. In the fury of a story being refused. Her form shattered into sparks, golden black and red, whipping through the atrium like furious embers. For a heartbeat, Harry thought the sparks would infect everyone. That the chaos would seed itself into 1,000 people. But the concordant oath held. The sparks hit the boundary of shared truth and dulled, falling like ash. Not gone, but bound. Contained in the world like a storm contained by weather patterns, not like a bomb hidden in a hero. Eris's presence faded, her laughter thinning into distant thunder. Her loss. T whisper curled through Harry's mind like silk. I'll be back the moment you lie to yourselves again. Then she was gone. Silence fell. Not the tense silence of fear. A heavy, stunned silence, like the world checking if it still had bones. Harry's scar cooled. For the first time since he'd touched the fragment, it didn't feel warm. It felt like skin again. Hermione's voice shook. Harry. Harry blinked, dizzy. I'm here. Ron let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his lungs for a year. You absolute idiot, Ron whispered, and it was love disguised as insult. Kings. Lay stared at the atrium, at the calm water, at the steady wards, at the crowd not fighting. Then he looked at Harry, and the authority in him softened into something like humility. What did you do? Kingsley asked quietly. Harry's voice was hoarse. We defined a line. Hermione stood straighter, despite her shaking hands. This won't hold if you go back to fear law, she said sharply. If you tighten cages and call them safety, you'll feed the cracks again. Kingsley swallowed. He looked out at the people, wardens, freehands, everyone between, still stunned, still breathing. Then, slowly, Kingsley nodded. We'll do it properly, he said. Not by decree, by consent. Ron muttered, good luck. Kingsley's mouth twitched, almost a smile. We'll need it. Epilogue, a wilder, wiser world. The world didn't go back to normal. It couldn't. The statute had been nicked, not shattered. The Muggle videos didn't vanish entirely. Some people remembered feelings they couldn't explain. A few remembered too much. And the Ministry had to adapt, less cover-up, more careful boundary work. Wandless magic didn't disappear. It stabilized, taught in controlled settings, treated like a skill instead of a rebellion. The wardens didn't vanish either. Some were prosecuted for violence. Some were folded into lawful protective services under strict oversight. The free hands split, some became teachers and advocates. Others became extremists who still believed chaos was purity. And Harry. Harry didn't become a god. He didn't become a weapon. He became a warning the world learned to listen to. Power without shared truth is just another kind of curse. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet enough, Harry still heard distant thunder, so far away it might have been memory. And when he did, he remembered Orissa's last whisper. He didn't fear it, he respected it, because he finally understood the real battle wasn't against a goddess. It was against the easiest lie humans always told themselves. That our side is pure, and the other side is the problem. Harry slept better after that. Not perfectly, but as a person, not a horse.